The royal court erupted the day the king's 17th prince, Hiel, turned 15. On his 15th birthday, he finally became an adult, and the king granted Hiel a dominion of his own. Hiel seethed. The place they'd granted him was a wreck, and he had to heal it himself. They shoved him onto a boat and delivered him to the island, but when land crawled into view, disappointment slammed him. The island they'd granted was nothing but a scatter of jagged reefs called Hiel Reef, 15 brutal days from the capital by sea, so remote even pirates gave it a wide berth. They left him off the island, then the escorts slammed the throttles and tore back, never bothering to check if he'd be able to land safely. That blasted rock was his post, and he couldn't even spot a place to land. This lone boulder had been claimed as the dominion of the 17th Prince of Sanphalis. His other siblings hooted and spat, scorned the moment he was handed the Hiel Reef. Misery gnawed at him over his weak abilities, but the cruelest cut was that he had no proper crest. Everyone was born with a crest, and his brothers flaunted dazzling crests that unleashed immense, unstoppable power. The crest he bore was a sealed riddle, and no one could crack what it actually did. He hurled himself at every test and ritual to force his crest to react, but it stayed dead. Shame swallowed their family. He had rushed to his father earlier, pleading for at least one representative, but the king's pride froze his decree. He wouldn't rewrite a single word for the plea, and he understood then that he was, in truth, exiled. They exiled him to an uninhabited mountain of rocks. He began imagining they'd execute him for trees. That would have been better than this, and he didn't want to die. He spotted a smaller cluster of rocks and risked landing there, fighting to keep his boat from smashing into them. He blasted them with a roaring gust of wind magic. His magic sputtered and died, not a single feather stirred. He slammed down in a brutal landing, yanked his supplies off the boat, and stashed them in a hidden, safe spot first. He spotted a cave on the horizon and hauled his supplies into its yawning mouth. He froze. What met his eyes was pure gutting horror. He staggered into a graveyard of bones, dozens of bleached skeletons strewn across the sand, the ruined remains of those who drifted to this island and perished. Terror slammed into him, but with no choice left, he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. He shoved the supplies inside anyway, then turned to the ocean, his eyes hollow with hopelessness. He stood stunned by the sight's beauty, a peaceful refuge miles from the capital's strife. But a restless ache burned in him for a different turn of fate. He smacked his face hard, yanking his senses back to life, and swore he'd claw his way out of this alive, no matter the cost. He hatched a plan, flagged down a passing ship, just not one from his own country. Choices were razor-thin since sailors avoided the reef. There were no routes here, and he still had to wrestle with other survival challenges. His food and water would only last about a month, and magic couldn't be trusted. He resolved to stash rain in every barrel he could find and survive by fishing. He dove into the cave first, scrubbing it clean and burying the scattered bones. This hollow was unfit to leave them. He yanked out a pickaxe and began hacking into the ground. Then he heard a voice thunder, declaring he'd just acquired a mining tool. A chill seized him. What was this voice that had burrowed straight into his mind? The voice sliced the quiet again, and he snapped, "What are you?" The voice erupted from his crest, Cave King, but its advisor protocol chained its tongue, preventing it from speaking to him. The day he discovered the crest he'd worn since birth was the Cave King itself. He froze, desperate to know why it had chosen this very moment to awaken. A thunderclap of truth hit him. He'd never once stepped into the royal capital's caves or mines. The crest revealed it would amplify his mining and support abilities, catapulting him up the ranks right there inside the cave. Swamped by a tidal wave of information, he clenched his jaw and dove headfirst into mining. The crest snapped awake, and before his eyes the cave lit up in pinpoint bursts across the rock. Those gleaming white veins screamed, "Dig here," the absolute prime spots to mine. They calculated every detail with razor precision, so he'd dodge any cave-ins or structural breaks. He took a shot, nailed a gleaming patch on his chest, and the blow slammed into that spot with brutal force. He gaped in shock. The crest supercharged his mining and granted night vision, turning the pitch-black tunnels into veins of glowing ore. He could press on digging unhindered. He set about carving a sleeping chamber for himself, and they hammered at the rock with iron resolve, digging on and on until time blurred. Before long, he dove in with a grin. He was actually having a blast. He swung his pick, driving the tunnel a few meters deeper into the cave. With every step deeper into the cave, his mining speed and raw strength surged. Leveling up related skills kept increasing how much rock he could tear through with a single swing. The crest advisor leaned in, eyes locked, and shot him one question. Did he want to retrieve the 168 rocks he'd dug up so far? He pressed, desperate to know where the retrieved rocks would go, and the crest declared they'd be sealed inside itself. He plunged back in, tearing at the earth faster and faster. It finally hit him. Mining had become impossible with rocks piled all around him. He lunged to snatch the rocks back, and they shot into his inventory like blocks in Minecraft. The crest flared and slotted an automatic retrieval option into place to back him up. Hope flared if he kept this pace he might actually reach the other side, so he shoved his hands into the dirt and started digging straight down. He dug deeper until the crest shouted he'd plunged 10 meters beneath his starting point, and he still had no clue what a meter even was. He hit pause and scanned his inventory, eyes darting over each item like a hunter zeroing in on prey. Mining here spat out copper, bronze, even glimmering gold. His jaw dropped, but he knew gold would be little use on an uninhabited island. Another rock snagged his gaze, the magic stone, its use a complete mystery, and the crest could scan and spit out everything it knew about the stones. It slammed into him. The magic stone could turbocharge a wielder's power, and the bigger the stone, the more their magic surged. Next, the turtle stone snagged his attention. It could buy a person one extra day of life. He'd stumbled onto a life-extending secret that blew his mind, and clutching his new crest he swelled with gratitude as his old scorn for the Hiel reef flipped into stunned awe at how breathtaking the domain truly was. He plunged into mining like a man possessed, so obsessed with the haul that he forgot to scan the skies for escape ships. Soon he plunged roughly 30 meters into the cave, his inventory now bulging with tons of rocks and ores. Of all the stones, the magic stone and turtle stone obsessed him. He hungered for more advanced magic and zeroed in on them. He shoved every one of his 90 magic stones into himself, siphoning their power straight into his veins. He braced for a jolt, then stared in stunned silence. After using them, nothing at all changed. He dove into a hands-on test, scrubbing clean the very path he'd just dug out. He unleashed wind magic. A gale tore through every crevice, completely filling the whole cave with wind, and he tore through the rubble, bones, and stones exploding outward, hurling every scrap out of the cave. He staggered. The power on display was his. They couldn't believe just 90 magic stones had blasted him to this insane level of power. Then a slime, drawn like iron to a magnet by his magic, surged straight toward him. The slime slid straight up to him. No menace, just a strange, almost fond pull toward Hiel, and Hiel stared, wondering what it could be. By the third time, reality slammed in. This life had become his new normal here. At first light, he snapped open his kit, tested every tool, and shoved food into his pack, bracing for another day of the usual digging. 3 days after meeting it, he claimed the slime as his companion and christened it Shell. 3 days ago, a slime slithered up to him, and the memory of what slimes were snapped back into his mind. The crest burned into him the power to tame the slime, and every monster he tamed swore fealty. It couldn't sway the outright hostile beasts, and any creature he did tame drew the kingdom's scorn where he'd once lived. Alone in the cave, no eyes watched and no voice condemned him for anything he dared to do. He bent the wild slime to his will and christened it Shell. Relief hit him, another living being at his side, and he was sure Shell couldn't understand him, but surprisingly, Shell caught a flicker of understanding for him. It threw its weight behind Hiel, becoming his backbone as he tunneled through the mines. He admitted Shell was shockingly smart, and because of her, he could now reach places that had once been utterly unreachable. He began throwing sharp, commanding gestures at Shell to force its next shape, and his mindings exploded, surging up to 3 times faster than before. His power exploded, and he siphoned 500 magic stones straight into his own body. Magic roared through him, and he no longer had to worry about food. When night fell, Shell morphed into a pillow, cradling his head in the exact curve he wanted. Later, deep in the mine, he uncovered about 10 more slimes, and effortlessly linking minds with them, he proved the Shell made them utterly unique among their kind. He didn't care, so long as they stayed out of his way when he mined. He fell asleep buzzing with anticipation for what he'd unearth tomorrow. And the next morning she yanked him awake, as if trying to. Shell erupted into weird, jerky hops to tell him something, and he watched, baffled why she was doing it. And zeroed in on the direction Shell frantically pointed toward. He caught sight of someone and bolted straight toward them. He rounded the cove and discovered 3 figures drifting toward his island. Green goblins, their boat apparently smashed against the rocks. He froze, instinct screamed they'd be dangerous to him. While most humans slaughtered goblins on sight, Shell begged him to protect them. He couldn't walk away. The thought of leaving them to die would eat him alive. He unleashed a recovery spell over them and hauled them to a safe haven. Right after, he slipped them into a hidden, safe spot and bolted. With them finally safe, he plunged back into the cave. He snapped at Shell to alert him the instant their condition shifted, then left him to stand guard over them. He knew one careless move with the goblins would make them pounce, and he kept telling himself he'd be fine even if something happened. Thanks to his strengthened magic power, a knot of anxiety sat in his gut. They quelled the panic, drew a steady breath, and plunged back into the mine. He ripped into the earth, and with every strike a wild thrill surged through him. Mining became his hobby that swallowed every other thought. He tore through his inventory, hunting for any new items. This time he unearthed 2 stones. The shining stone, whose glow never faded, and the musogi stone, capable of lifting any curse from anyone. He dismissed them as useless. He already had night vision, and in this isolated place no one could curse him. He squared his shoulders and dug on, and after some time, Shell burst in to give him the signal. Goblins were awake. He slipped out to spy on the goblins, melting into shadow the instant he heard them. Playing it safe, he slipped into the shadows to eavesdrop while one of them poked at Hiel's food, and the others snapped at him to stop, the general goblin. El felt Hiel's presence like a chill and snapped into a battle-ready stance. The princess goblin demanded El lower his weapon. Hiel saved them, she cried. But El couldn't. Suspicion coiled in him. He still saw Hiel as a lethal threat. Hiel froze, heart hammering, when his own tongue spilled from the goblins' mouths. They might hail from his very continent. He swore he wouldn't lift a finger against them, but El's instincts snarled. El wouldn't trust a human that easily. El accused Hiel of scheming. The guilty flash on his face gave it away, and Hiel blinked, utterly confused. Shell snapped into a gleaming mirror, and when Hiel saw his own face reflected, a cold shock ripped through him. Shock slammed him. His face had twisted into something terrifying, radiating pure, lethal danger. A brutal truth slammed into him. Mining every day had been turning him into something else. He forced a calm mask and told El to eat his food. He could always dig up more. He unleashed wind magic, whipping the water into a frenzy and plucking fish after fish to prove he could haul in far more food. El's jaw dropped at the raw power he'd just seen, and he snapped, "If you're this strong, why didn't you just kill them?" Princess Goblin charged back, voice blazing, desperate to make El finally understand. She suddenly faltered and crumpled to the ground, and panic exploded through them. Their princess was down. He'll bark, "You're still not healed." The elder goblin snarled at him. That's not the case. A life-shrinking curse slammed into Rai, stealing her years with every heartbeat. They crumpled into despair when their princess's time to go came, tears of sorrow pouring down their faces. Hiel watched everything unravel and slammed into Vari and El, ripping them from the sacrifice as they tried to throw away their lives to die with her. He vowed he could cure her. El exploded, snarling they'd tried everything after that. He seized the Misogi stone he'd found earlier and unleashed it on Rai. Right after seeing her lifespan cruelly shaved down, he sacrificed 79 turtle stones for her. Their eyes burned with curiosity. Where had he acquired those rare stones? What mattered was that their Princess Rai had snapped back to life, feeling healthier than ever, while Rai stood stunned and confused because she'd been sure she was dead. El finally understood Hiel wasn't a villain. Seeing he'd saved the princess, El slammed his forehead into the earth in an apologetic bow so hard it cracked the ground. He beckoned them over, urging, "Join me, eat while we introduce ourselves," then froze in stunned respect at El's raw power, remembering how El had smashed the stone floor with his bare head earlier, a brutal reminder that goblins were terrifying. They sat down together. El apologized fiercely and announced himself as General El of the Belden tribe. She followed, introducing herself as Rodden's daughter, Rodden, the tribe's king, and the elder goblin Vari bowed and declared himself the Belden tribe's shaman. Right after the introductions, he dropped a bombshell. He was once the prince of the kingdom of Sanfeliz. El bragged he could wield every spell he'd seen and rival the prince. The prince scoffed and revealed his power came from the magic stones he'd dug up. Hild's voice cut through the air as he demanded to know why they were on the island. El unleashed the story of how orcs had torched their hometown into smoking ruin. Their royal line was nearly wiped out. Only Princess Reese survived, and for a year she and the ragged survivors scoured clan after clan for shelter, turned away and hunted by humans, until they set their sights on the new world. Panic crashed over them when their ship ran down. They didn't even know if anyone else was safe. Princess Rai grabbed Vari, eyes blazing, and spat out, "Don't blame yourself. If we'd stayed on land, we'd have met the same fate." She threw her arms around Hiel, gratitude blazing in her eyes as she thanked him for saving monsters like them. Hiel forced a smile and told them it was fine, even as their story stabbed him with pity. She said again she wouldn't live long, relief roaring through her as the burning in her chest eased, and she could die in peace. He roared, "It's too soon to give up." They told her that countless turtle stones slumbered beneath the earth, and by harnessing them they could keep stretching her life for as long as they wanted. He swore to them that if he dug non-stop for a week, he might buy her more than a year of life. Elle insisted it was too much to ask of him, then stepped in and offered to dig alongside him. Hiel brushed it off and said, "It's fine." Ellen Rin's voice cracked with gratitude as she thanked him for saving her life and demanded to know why he'd given her something so precious. He grinned, told her not to worry. He was digging just for fun, and having her there now made his chest surge with gladness. Tears welled and her breath hitched when she realized she still had more life ahead. Anyone snatched back from death's jaws would react exactly like that. Hiel shrugged it off, insisting it was no big deal, even as his mind raced for what to do next. He had more than enough ice axes, but if he could seal the spots they burrowed into, the crest whispered he could infuse his tamed monsters with shards of his own power. He leaned in and asked if they'd let him tame them, saying it would let them dig at his side, and assured them they were free to choose. Turtle stones would be theirs either way. Gratitude surged through them as they leapt at his offer, pledging themselves to him as his tamed monsters. "We swore ourselves to his service." She hurled herself into helping everyone, refusing to idle while others toiled for her, determined to repay the debt she owed him. He dove headfirst into naming them, then christened Elvin, and Vari snapped into Veres. They read aloud to Rihanna, faces alight with their new names, and vowed to offer him everything from that moment on. He whipped out the glowing stone and fashioned torches for the others. None of them could see in the dark like he could. They locked onto the gleaming spots, perfect places to dig. Then he strode in and showed them exactly how to mine from now on. He barreled into the wall in front of him, sending it crashing down into a cloud of rubble. He vowed they'd dig like this, insisting he hadn't started out this way either. He zeroed in on the rocks. Nobody else could auto-retrieve them, and ordered Shell to drill the other slimes on grabbing the stones and hauling the ores. He swore practice would forge anyone into perfection. They joined forces and threw themselves into mining together, and the cave he was digging burst to life from that day on. A jagged memory stabbed Hiel, yanking him back into yet another devastating moment from his past. Bullies tore into him, sneering and shoving him because everyone labeled him weak. Rage flared. He hurled himself between the monster and those bullies, shielding it as they tied it down and tormented it. Something jabbed into his neck, and the memory of that incident slammed back into him. Elvin leaned in and asked, wiped out from all that digging. Rihanna's brow creased as she pushed, "Are you all right?" Rihanna's song hit him like a shock. He said he was just thinking some things, and he couldn't be tired from digging because his cave king crest kept fatigue at bay. She warned him not to overwork himself. He vowed he wouldn't. Then a delicious aroma hit him like a surprise attack. The room filled with the electric scent of apple pie. Rihanna had baked one for everyone, and they erupted, faces alight at the surprise of something new to eat. It's been 3 days since he met the goblins. In that short time, they'd already whipped up a bunch of new things. It masqueraded as a bathroom, but in truth it hid a vast reservoir. A simple kitchen anchored the place, and thanks to that, everything held together. He devoured Rihanna's cooking like it was treasure. Every dish she made was a knockout. It always exploded with flavor. She beamed, thrilled to see him savor every bite. Relief surged through him the moment Rihanna started putting the things he'd hauled in from the country to work. Elvin's eyes lit up. He'd never imagined mining could be this thrilling. Veres agreed, and a fierce relief surged through them. They were thrilled to be fighting to buy their princess more time. They granted her life, and she thanked them for it. With every sunrise, their situation brightened, but a mountain of tasks still loomed ahead. He still lacked vital supplies, and a new crisis gnawed at them. They needed food beyond endless fish and fresh clothes, because the fish was spoiling and their garments were slowly falling apart. Hope for outside help had dried to dust. He'd intercept any ship that came and use his gems to buy supplies. What struck him most was that, little by little, his mind sharpened into the heavy, calculating worries of a true lord of the land. He shoved himself deeper into the mine for now, clawing out turtle stones for Rihanna and scouring every seam for any new gems. Mid-dig, his pick slammed into a hollow pocket beneath the stone. He yanked the lid open and peered inside, revealing a scatter of strangely shaped, mismatched stones, which they blazed sunset orange and looked nothing like the shining stones. They surged ahead a few more paces. His heart jolted. The dirt here wasn't the same. He snapped his head up, and a colossal spider loomed right in front of him. He froze, staring into the spider's eyes inches from his face as terror clawed at him. Would it devour him now? He unleashed a crackling storm of magic, striking back at the spider. Out of nowhere, the spider bolted away from him. He finally took it in, and the truth hit him like a freight train. Turns out the spider was the one to fear. It lashed out to protect its young, and guilt slammed into him for scaring it. Then the crest screamed into his mind. Tameable monsters had been spotted. Minutes melted away as Elvin kept vigil, eyes locked on the road for Hiel's return. He jolted as his boss returned, spiders skittering right behind him. He fired off an apology for the scare, then turned to the others and grinned that he'd just wrangled the cave spiders onto his side. Varys staggered back. Those spiders loomed colossal before him. Varys warned Hiel that these spiders, roughly his size, spun silk tougher than iron, packed lethal venom in their fangs, and preyed without mercy, devouring monsters and people alike. Horror slammed into him when he saw the dirt at the back of the cave was actually their own waste, and Varys stepped up next to blare the good news. They discovered cave spider dirt could fertilize their fields, making crops burst to life and turning farming into a total breeze. Varys stared at the barren stretch and demanded, "Where are we supposed to farm in a place like this?" Hiel smirked and replied, "Watch this, I've got something to show you." He led them to the tunnel's mouth and dared them to peek into the waiting darkness. They gaped, stunned by the sheer number of stairs, and they asked where they'd come from, and he shot back that he'd made them on the way back with Tarin, the spider. The path was too narrow for her, so he carved the stairs and ripped the cavern open using newly unlocked features of his cave king powers. He could now sculpt the minefield any way he wanted, process and synthesize items from his inventory, and graft upgrades like night vision even onto tamed monsters. Elvin and the others roared at the progress, fired up to work even harder the next day. Hiel announced a welcome party for Tarin and its children. Ryan volunteered to grill a mountain of fish and vowed to remodel the island later, filling it with new attractions. Elvin and Varys kept hammering out ice axes, and he'd leap in on the tricky bits to show them the ropes. He declared that simply being able to forge iron tools out here was a massive leap forward for them. They ordered Rihanna to knit clothes from spider silk. After that, he barked, "Dump all the waste into one single spot." Soon he discovered Tarin tore through the air with a speed that outstripped everything he'd ever known. Then he seized the spider waste strewn patch and drove an apple seed straight into it. It burst to full size in the blink of an eye. Hiel hadn't expected it to be this fast. Then the reason hit him like a freight train. Tarn had swelled into a giant, and then it hit him. The tree hadn't grown from the waste at all. It was being fueled by the sunstones hidden in that cave. Realizing the stones couldn't be found anywhere else, he cradled them and safeguarded them with fierce, careful precision. He bellowed Rihanna's name and thrust the reins of command into her hands. She mapped out the sunstones and plantation plans, asked if he was truly sure about giving her the job, and swore she wouldn't let him down. Convinced he could trust her with it, he vaulted onto a riding shell and blasted all the way back. With everyone fixated on mining, he doubled down and plunged into the mines harder than anyone. Now his mission was clear. Mine more turtle stones. Rihanna had already gained 5 years of lifespan, but he still worried. She was only 15 like him, and he knew she'd want more, so he tore into the mines, every swing precise because he was the most efficient miner of them all. As he dug, his hand struck a gleaming white stone, and he snatched it up like a prize. The plain white stone ripped off its disguise and revealed a dragon orb that could pull a person back from death. He slammed his hand on the dirt and barked to the others, "Dig right where I'm standing." He tore through that spot until his arms trembled and still couldn't unearth a single dragon orb. A cold fear struck him. If dragon stones could resurrect people at will, limitless revival would become a nightmare. He yanked the stone out of his inventory and kept it at his side. A heartbeat later, Elvin's frantic shout snapped him to attention. He was calling his name. His mind raced through every dark possibility, and he abandoned the dragon orb at a spot. He bolted upstairs. The stone hurtled down and landed squarely on a corpse. Elvin shouted to Hiel, eyes fixed on the horizon. He could see their comrade's ship bearing down on them. And recognition slammed into him. It was them. They beamed when they spotted the other goblins from their tribe had survived, and Elvin's daughter stepped forward among them alive. He barked at Elvin that docking the ship here would be a death trap and ordered him to take his boat toward them. Fearing the Elvin and others would leave with their tribe, he stuffed their packs with countless sunstones as a parting gift so they could restore their tribe anywhere they wanted. Confusion slammed into Elvin. He couldn't fathom what he'd meant, to which Hiel urged him to leave that remote place. It would be better for both of them. He swore they'd kick off trading the instant they lock down a good place to settle. Confusion slammed into them when the words, "they were leaving him," hit their ears. Elvin hurled a raw, desperate plea at Hiel. Don't abandon them like this. He slammed it home. They'd pledged to always stand by his side and would never abandon him. Rian snapped that they were under his command. Relief surged through him, but he barked a warning. They might never get another chance to leave like this. She urged him to join them if that proved true. He looked back at the mountain of rock as a memory crashed through him. There was a time he ached to escape this place. Everything had changed. Clarity slammed into Ryan, and he finally knew, bone deep, how he felt about this place. She planted her feet and vowed, if he isn't leaving, neither am I. Elvin and Varys moved as one in thought, their convictions perfectly aligned. It struck him so hard his throat tightened. Suddenly the ocean's tides convulsed and began dragging the ship under. Panic clawed at Elvin. Most of the goblins on board couldn't swim. They leaped into the boat and tore across the water to rescue them. Watching them bolt, dread sank into his gut. He knew they might not make it in time. The situation demanded it. His worst memories detonated before his eyes. Rage boiled in his veins as he stood powerless, unable to lift a finger for anyone. This time he was different. He bolted straight for the cliff's edge. He launched himself off the cliff, eyes blazing with deadly focus. He trusted him at last. This time he wasn't a lost cause. He steeled his mind and poured every ounce of faith into the king of the cave's crest. He unleashed a thunderous blast of ice magic straight into the ocean. He froze every drop of water around the sinking ship into glassy ice, yanking its hull upright and denying the waves any chance to flip it over. He stood wide-eyed as raw power surged through him. After channeling the power of over 8,000 magic stones, he felt unstoppable. He kept the ice firm and shouted for Elvin and the others to sprint across it to save them. Elvin plunged into the task, but his foot betrayed him and he slipped on the. Standing on the ice, realization slammed into Hiel. He'd never thought of that before. Taran hurled herself in, scooped Hiel onto her back, and barreled across the ice, and a jolt hit Hiel. Taran's leg might be the key to getting help. More Terran spider children swarmed in, racing to their aid. They watched Elvin freeze, despair burning because he couldn't do anything, yet he still turned to the spiders with a shaky, grateful smile. Shell darted to Hiel's side, throwing herself into the effort alongside the other slimes. He roared for everyone to haul the drowned ones to shore. He pinned the ocean's tides back with roaring magic, keeping the waves from reaching others, the slimes, spiders. Elvin and the others tore through the danger, hauling everyone to safety. When the smoke cleared, the rescue had succeeded with no casualties. Hiel unleashed a tidal wave of healing magic, sweeping through and mending every wound of those injured in the chaos. Reen grabbed Hiel, gratitude burning in his chest. You saved everyone. I don't know how I'll ever repay this debt. Relief flooded him as he told them that seeing everybody safe was enough to make him happy. Tears poured from Elvin's eyes the moment he met his daughter Fu. After years convinced she was gone, pure, unstoppable joy tore through him at the sight that she was alive. Everyone else erupted into joyful cheers, thrilled by the emotional reunion. Hiel roared he couldn't have pulled it off alone. Spiders and slimes swarmed. Reyna and the Elven and Varys forces rallied beside him, and together they hauled the entire Belden tribe to safety, something he'd never managed before. Seeing how different everything was now, gratitude exploded in his chest. He couldn't thank them enough for forging him into someone better. Varys' gaze locked on a man looming behind Hiel, and he barked, "Who is he?" A strange man burst onto the scene, catching everyone completely off guard. He pressed Varys. Could that man have been on the ship? Varys snapped there was no one like him, and a cold doubt crept in as he wondered if he'd met the stranger in the cave. Every assumption shattered as the guy stood there, utterly naked. He stormed up to him and tried to get through to him. He spun on his heel and strode over to the others, diving in with them to tear into the food. Hunger clawed at him, so Rihanna snatched more fish and tossed them onto the roaring fire, roasting a hot batch for both of them. Helen Varys pinned the stranger with a hard stare, curiosity igniting. Who was this man? The next day, Hiel raced from cabin to cabin, carving out rooms for everyone who'd just arrived on the island. He tamed every last one and christened them by name. Conditions weren't great, but a quiet thrill swelled in him as his island slowly woke and grew much livelier than before. It lit a wildfire under him, driving him too. They blasted production of supplies and food into overdrive. Rihanna swept in to heal him, pressing a glass of freshly made juice into his hands and insisting he take a sip. The grape juice exploded with flavor. Fresh-picked grapes made every single sip sing, which Rihanna had coaxed to life with sunstones and the grape seeds she found on the boat. She declared the plantation tiny for now, but in a few years it would brim with all kinds of fruit, and he heard Rihanna say years. She'd never thought about the future before, but now she could, and that set his heart blazing with happiness. He swore she'd always be able to count on him for anything he could do. He then heard other goblins shouting. They were wrestling with a mysterious stranger who prowled among them, fixing everyone with a cold stare. The goblins snapped for him to leave. The stares made him squirm and spat, Mappa. By now everyone had started calling him Mappa. The nickname clung to him like a brand. Mappa then snatched up the items the goblin had fashioned. He flung them back like trash, sneering they weren't worth a second glance, and the goblin exploded in rage. He slammed a hammer into Mappa's hand and dared him to try it himself. A fierce determination ignited in Mappa's eyes. Mappa tore into his work, grabbed his tools, and handcrafted every item himself. He handled it like a seasoned pro, every move sharp and dripping with confidence. Hiel and the others watched Mappa wear it like second skin, like he'd been through this 100 times. And when Mappa slammed their hammers into the white-hot iron, sparks flew as they pounded it lightning fast. Amazement pinned them to the spot as Mappa hammered out the final ice axes in a flash. It erupted into existence, flawless and elegant, exactly like a work of art. He itched to throw Mappa's lone pickaxe into the ring against the ordinary ones. Doubt gnawed at him. Were his pickaxes even good enough to use? He swung them in tandem through the cave, hacking rock until every doubt exploded into dust. The pickaxe I forged came out absurdly tough, far stronger than the usual one, even though it was made from the same iron. His eyes snapped to the exact spot where the dragonstone sat. He'd been sure he'd left it there, but the place stared back empty. His eyes snapped to a startling mark etched into the rim of the hole in the ground. He pieced together that bones lay in the rock's shadow, and a cold truth slammed into him. The dragon stone had brought Mappa back to life. Joy exploded in his chest. He'd just won another rock-solid comrade. Fueled by Mappa's help, they obliterated the island's coastline until it lay flat. They ripped the ship apart and rebuilt it from the keel up, then charged into bigger projects and began making real progress. He rounded up more slimes and tamed them, putting them to work hauling boulders. Everything hummed along, but the turtle stones kept vanishing. He watched their numbers dwindle, far fewer than before. Rihanna insisted the turtle stones she already had were enough, but 10 years on the clock felt like robbery, a paltry sentence stolen from a girl who'd barely begun to live. A lightning bolt realization struck Hiel. Helping her wasn't the only reason he'd been throwing himself into it. He desperately wanted Rihanna to stay longer, craving more time to keep digging and shape the island with her. He burst through the last tunnel, and a colossal chamber yawned behind the cave he'd just dug. He'd sworn the island was empty, but every silent ruin screamed that this island, once home to people, had been struck by something mysterious ages ago. He burst into the room, snatching up every item he laid eyes on. He seized the heart stone, a pulsing core that could become the heart of an artificial organism, and now he could create dolls. He bellows the call now, or summons more comrades to his side. He barreled to the room's center and snatched the golden stone into his hands. A changed stone could spark a monster's evolution. The altered stone could transmute a monster into an entirely new species, imprinting that species' age and personality onto it. At first, the whole thing sent chills down his spine. A bolt of inspiration struck him, and later on, he squared his shoulders and summoned Varys, Rihanna, and Elvin to lay everything on the table. Varys's eyes flashed as he confirmed he'd heard of the stone. It's named in their legends. He jabbed a finger at Hiel and demanded, "Know any species that look like goblins?" Memories of hobgoblins and leaf goblins crashed back into him. Varys leaned in and said they'd all been ordinary goblins once. The power-hungry twisted themselves into hulking hobgoblins. The ones who longed for the forest became leaf goblins, and every one of them had used that change stone. Those examples hit him like a thunderclap, and he'll finally grasp what evolving truly means. The first time Varys laid eyes on the stone, astonishment knocked the wind from him. And he'll remember, like a lightning strike, that the Cave King's crest warned him earlier the stone could evolve and renew the lifespan. He shot the question at them, "Wanna try it?" Curiosity sparked in Elvin's eyes, but he shook it off and declined. He loved his body exactly as it was. Rihanna cut in, blazing with resolve. She wanted to try to become someone who could wield magic to heal, but she froze, nerves coiling. Could she really bring herself to use something so precious? Elvin and Varys leapt at the idea, and Hiel was all in too. He pressed her to unleash her magic, insisting it would be a massive help. Above everything else, his heart burned with one fierce wish, that she would live longer. His words struck like lightning, igniting a fierce resolve in her to evolve. He nodded, thrusting the changed stone into her palm. She clenched it in her hands and squeezed her eyes shut. A fierce wish ignited, to be able to stay with Hiel for a long time. She pictured the species she wanted to become, and the stone flared brighter, its light snaking hungrily toward her. Its blinding brilliance flared so fiercely everyone snapped their eyes shut. Seconds later, their jaws dropped, as Rihanna transformed into a cute teenage human girl. She gaped at her new reflection, shock jolting through her, but Mappa was the most shocked. He froze, and a nosebleed exploded the moment he laid eyes on that breathtakingly beautiful naked girl. After a few hours, he suddenly jolted awake. He snapped awake, baffled he'd even fallen asleep, and the memory of how slammed into him. Here's how it went down the moment Rihanna evolved. His eyes snapped open to Rihanna cradling his head in her lap, and she promised, "I'm right here for you." Seeing her hit him like a bolt, his cheeks burned and his thoughts scattered. He sprang to his feet, still stunned by her new appearance. She insisted he lie down. He'd collapsed without warning just moments before. He barreled in front of Rihanna to shield her from Mappa's nosebleed, taking the full bloody spray himself. He rasped that he was okay now, just drained from before then, voice shaking, asked how long he'd been asleep and whether Mappa was okay. She hissed, "Mappa's asleep too." He snapped, "Are you all right?" Nobody expected her to look human now. She fell silent for a minute, then dropped the bomb. She didn't actually like her old self. Cursed as a child, the sickness hollowed her body over the years, her beautiful sisters sneering at her and her parents, who first reached out to help, slowly recoiled and began to shun her. So that's why, when she transformed and locked eyes with her reflection, she was reborn as the exact beautiful person she'd always wanted to be. She fell to her knees, voice cracking, begging Hiel to forgive her for squandering that precious stone on a selfish wish. He told her she didn't have to say that. He'd changed since he set foot on this island. She had every right to seize a fierce, brand-new life of her own, and that was perfectly fine. It would have been a travesty to saddle her with a body she loathed. She poured out her thanks, voice cracking with gratitude for his boundless generosity and steady understanding. He'd given her a body and a new life, so she pledged every ounce of herself to him. He clutched her hands, words choking in his throat as he fought to speak, but they spun around. Mappa stood right behind them, watching the whole scene unfold. The revelation slammed into both of them, leaving them reeling, and Rihanna's new transformation ripped through the Belden tribe, shocking them to their core. She fashioned her own clothes from rough Terran and the silks of others. She fired the question at them, how were they looking at her? Only those who'd watched her evolve believed it. Everyone else couldn't fathom it had happened overnight. They watched Rihanna throw herself into the work, realized it was truly her, and their defenses melted. They welcomed her in no time. She hurled herself into mastering arcane arts and brutal martial combat with her. Reborn into a new life, he burned with endless ambitions. Her ears devoured every sound, even the tiniest whisper of her own movements. Hiel's grin exploded as he watched her laugh, reveling in every moment of her transformation. Varys barged in and demanded, "What were you thinking?" He blurted he hadn't been staring at Rihanna's legs, and Ferris shrugged, saying he figured Hiel would spot Rihanna's crest. It branded her as a farmer. Rihanna wore the farmer's crest. Fields burst into bounty under her touch, so Hiel's call to hand her the plantation paid off. His jaw dropped. A goblin could sport a crest too. Varys shrugged, admitting it was possible. He'd shoot out an apology the moment he sounded rude. He'd only just discovered crests were exclusive to humans. Varys then whipped out his crest and thrust it under his nose. The Sorcery King was a crest like no other, a roaring, untamed power he knew could erupt into devastation, but Varys bared a bitter smile and snapped, "I can't use it, there's no magic in me." He could lend Rihanna his crest to turbocharge her magic studies, even though he himself couldn't wield it. Varys urged them to wrest territory from the sea, push the island's shores outward, and supercharge their harvests. He resolved, too, to carve out wide-open spaces where children could run and play. Varys warned they'd need more raw materials. Hiel leaned in, eyes alight, and asked Varys to leave it to him. He wanted to try something. A thrill shot through him as he realized he could use the workshop even outside the cave. He channeled it to conjure raw materials, blocks popping into existence exactly where he'd plotted. He unleashed a furious surge of water magic and ripped the seawater away from around them. He jammed rock and gravel into it, then smothered the surface with dirt scraped from the spider's cage. He resolved that this would have to be enough, for now. He cobbled together a massive space with the workshop's help, and Rihanna, Varys, and Elvin raced over to check it out. The kids swarmed after them, enchanted by the place and showering Hielford with grateful cheers. Relief and pride surged through him. He was thrilled to have helped them. Rihanna's eyes lit up as she thanked him, saying she could use this very space to grow great crops. He practically vibrated with anticipation, too. Out of nowhere, a colossal bird dove from the sky, ambushed Mappa, and swallowed him whole. Panic erupted among the goblins as the killer bird, infamous for hunting in relentless flocks, swooped down. He bellowed for everyone to scramble back into the cave. They bolted back toward safety when one kid tripped and slammed into the dirt. The chaos slammed shut around them. Fola dove in to help as the kid blasted the flock aside with fierce magic. Out of nowhere, a furious bird swooped straight at Fola, and the kid beak locked on them like a missile. At the last heartbeat, an elven strike cleaved the bird's neck clean off. He ripped his daughter from the danger and screamed for her to run, get out of there. Next, he swung with lethal force and beheaded several killer birds. The Belden tribe's goblin general exploded into action, unleashing his true power for all to see. He stepped forward and swore to join Elven, throwing himself into helping him. Out of nowhere, another bird swooped in from behind, hurtling straight at them. Rihanna's shield magic flared to life and snapped the attack aside. She snapped, "Do what you must." She covered him, freeing him to zero in on the killer birds and unleash a brutal onslaught. He barked at Elven to be careful, aim only for the birds' heads. They didn't know which one hid the mapper. Varys beckoned them to the entrance. He steeled himself and barreled forward to protect it. A bolt of realization slammed through him. He had the heart stone. He hatched a plan. He forged a hulking golem from his rocks, drove the heart stone into its chest, then unleashed it to smash the entrances and slaughter the birds with terrifying ease. While the bird that had swallowed Mappa convulsed, it violently spat him back out. A slime lunged and snatched him back from the brink with a heartbeat to spare. Relief exploded through them. They didn't have to worry about hitting Mappa anymore. He urged Elven to gather them now. Elven unleashed his axes, each tethered to Terran silk ropes, to snare dozens of murderous birds in one fell swoop. The roll packed a punch, and next he burst onto the scene. He lashed out with blizzard magic, encasing the birds in ice and snatching them in a frozen vice. With a single, thunderous sweep, he encased every tied-up target in solid ice. Seeing that, the remaining killer birds were obliterated in an instant. The other goblins erupted into raucous cheers, reveling in their hard-won victory. Elven's grin split his face as his boss unleashed a jaw-dropping masterclass in the fight. Rihanna shot over to heal him, her voice urgent as she asked if he was hurt. He swallowed his pride and admitted he'd been terrified at first, but she stood at his side now, and calm flooded his veins. Hiel's legs quaked. This was his first fight against the monsters. Relief hit Varys like a thunderclap the moment he saw them alive and well. Their voices roared in agreement, and pride exploded in him as he reveled in how far he'd come from where he once stood. Pride swelled in him. He pictured himself as an actual feudal lord. They trudged back to the caves, and on the way he asked Rihanna if they could eat killer birds, and she laughed, saying they were edible and downright delicious once roasted. Late into the night, they threw a banquet like nothing anyone had ever seen, and everyone was invited. He bit into monster meat for the first time, heart racing as wild. Alien flavors slammed across his tongue. Every bite detonated with flavor, courageously tasty. I was blown away. It was pure greatness. Rihanna beamed at his approval and urged him to try sole next. He tried it, and it blew him away. She froze mid-bite. The meat tasted different. She warned him, every part of a killer bird hits the palate in a wildly different way, so whichever piece he ate changed everything. He knew killer birds stalked them now, but grinned at the silver lining. They could be turned into a steady food supply, so he kept the golem posted to watch the skies. Relief crashed over Varys. The killer birds always backed off from anything larger than themselves. Varys slammed his palm down and ordered a guard unit, demanding walls and watchtowers to shield the fields from the ocean's salt. Hiel took charge of the stonework and asked Varys to handle the planning. He felt her gaze cut through him, and his memory betrayed him. Her name had vanished. A thunderbolt of recognition struck him. She was Elvin's daughter. He blurted her name at him, despite being the one who'd named her, Fulla. She stared him down and demanded, "Why are you so strong?" He roared to her that it was the magic stones he'd pried from the earth while mining. Fulla's eyes flashed at the news of stones here, and she burst out, "Can I dig too?" Rihanna's eyes flashed as she declared to Fulla she had to use a change stone to evolve and unleash magic. Fuller lunged to evolve next, only to be stopped cold. He didn't have a single evolution to use. Elven exploded onto the scene and delivered a crushing punch to Fulla for bothering Hiel. He snapped at her to stop speaking rudely to Hiel. Elven apologized for her, and Hiel couldn't miss the uncanny resemblance between father and daughter. He grinned and threw down a challenge, find a change stone yourself, and you can wield it. The moment she heard it, a bolt of excitement struck her and she leapt in, eager to join. She signed up for healing and mining, swearing she'd be the one to patch up every wound. Relief surged through him. Extra hands were now tearing into the mine, pushing the work forward. Then he poured 800 magic stones into Ride, blasting her magic power through the roof. She seized the reins, vowed to pour every ounce of herself into making it even better. Ilvin snapped that she had to start eating properly for that, and fast. The day ended with the Hiel reclaiming the land, and ravenously devouring a mountain of tasty food. That day erupted into Shield Reef's first-ever Memorial Day. Next day, he plunged into the cold freezer at Rihanna's suggestion to stash massive amounts of food, and he expanded it until it was huge. A brutal cold knocked him flat. With a freezer humming now, they no longer had to worry about meat going bad. She said frozen caves could preserve food for well over 6 months. Mappa zeroed in on the door and commissioned Hiel to forge it. Hiel seized the vision at once and hammered out the exact shape Mappa wanted. Later, they overhauled the forge and entrusted its care to Mappa and Varys. Reen claimed the job of blasting freeze into the frozen cave every so often, and with each icy strike her confidence surged. Elvins and Varys shored up the outer defenses, and with the plan holding, he plunged headlong back into the mines. Fulham stared, stunned. Everything had gone flawlessly, and not a single disaster had struck. Her jaw dropped. The Cave King had helped achieve so much without a single cave. She snapped they had to install ventilation now. Letting dust pile into already damaged lungs would only make things worse. If coal gases pooled inside, they'd choke everyone or blow the cave apart, so she knew a venting device that would funnel the air outside, and decided to ask MAPPA to build it later. Fuller's words hit like a lifeline. She revealed she'd been delving into mines since she was a child. The miner's crest on her chest steadied him, relief washed over him, and allowed her to speak freely if she found anything else to be changed. Experience had turned her into a bloodhound for lost ores. She sniffed them out and unearthed them with ruthless instinct, his fiercest rival since Terran. Fuller slammed the question at Hiel, "Do you even have a father?" He shot back that he did have one, but it was tearing him apart too. He still flinched at the memory of his father and brothers. Even after he'd seized incredible powers, his family's boundless might still towered over him. He then leaned in and fired the question at Fula. Did she want to be stronger than her father, the answer blazing in her eyes? Fula skidded to a halt when a hollow cave yawned before her. Curiosity flared, and she tore toward its dark mouth to see what lay inside. It was a cavernous stone room, and she blurted, "Is the change stone stored in a room like this too?" He gave a sharp nod, and she erupted with excitement, darting off to comb every corner. A statue snapped to life and unleashed a blistering torrent of fire magic. He slams a shield into place at the last second, saving himself in Fuller. He shot the question at her, "Are you okay?" He sized them up and realized the statues weren't just stone. They were golems that could wield magic. Golems kept swarming him, hammering him with relentless blows, and a few even charged wielding swords. They surrounded him in Fuller, but he had a strategy in mind to deal with it. He wielded wind magic, tore the sky into raging storms, and managed. He hurled the flying golems aside like trash. Fuller was fine, she flinched, then owned her mistake, apologizing for barreling ahead without thinking. He never imagined he'd be forced to face golems like these. He snapped a signal to Shell, who instantly ordered everyone to halt mining operations. Fuller's hand snapped around a stone and she shoved it at Hiel, breathless and urgent. "Is this the golden change stone?" It wasn't a trinket, it was a sorcery stone that could conjure dolls. Disappointment ripped through her when she saw it wasn't a change stone. Mappa burst out of nowhere, jolting her. Mappa plunged into the wreckage and began wrenching the sword free. Golems thrummed with joy and surged back up to the surface. Fulla gaped, wondering how long Mappa would stay naked. She asked if all humans were like that, and he shook his head. No, but Mappa was practically buzzing with extra excitement. He lunged to wrench the sword from the other golem, but he heaved, muscles screaming as he poured every ounce of strength in. Still the sword refused to budge. Even if he and Fulla pushed themselves to the edge, shoulder to shoulder. He lunged for the sword, but the crest flashed a warning. He could only collect minerals and mined items, nothing else. He snatched up a pickaxe, determined to shatter the sword. It still refused to break. He kept hammering at the blade, trying to snap it, and after countless attempts, he finally shattered it. His gaze locked on the sword as a single burning question detonated inside him. What was it crafted from? They'd unearthed orichalcum, feather light, tougher than metal, and perfect for channeling potent magical enchantments. He dove deeper into his inventory and froze when something shocking stared back. Back in the main cave, Elvin strained every muscle, roaring as he fought to lift the sword Mappa had hauled back with him. Moments later, Hiel also barreled back in and snapped, "What's going on?" Riel leaned in and rattled off the tail of the sword. Everyone was straining and heaving, desperate to lift it. He roared, "This'll be brutal. The sword's made of 300 orichalcum." Full pleaded with her father, insisting it couldn't be done. Elvin pushed through the pain and, with a thunderous heave, finally lifted it. The sword erupted with raw power the instant he strengthened the great warrior crest. His arms gave out, he couldn't keep it aloft, and it crashed from his hands. Hiel sprinted to him, poured his recovery magic into the wound, and the small cut sealed almost instantly. Fuller didn't hesitate. She flung herself into her father's arms. Worry for him burned in her chest, and she lashed out, "You idiot!" at him for making her worry. Regret cracked his voice as he apologized and vowed he'd be far more careful from now on. Mappa hoisted the sword as if it weighed nothing. He plunged the sword into the furnace's roaring maw. Born into a legendary race of dwarves, Mappa hunted rare minerals. Driven by titanic strength, arcane techniques, and a noble spirit, he began to forge something from the orichalcum. Mappa hammered something into being, then surged forward to heal. He thrust the forged item into their hands, as if Mappa had forged it just for him. He hefted a pickaxe forged from orichalcum. Afterwards, Mappa kept feverishly forging more orichalcum tools, and for reasons only he knew, he did it completely naked. The next day, Elvin plunged into battle against a shadowy something, swinging his axe until it proved useless. Elvin snapped, took it as a dare, and charged straight at the monster, meeting it head-on at point-blank range. Meanwhile, back in the cave, Fuller prowled the shadows, probing every crevice for signs of danger. She flashed a triumphant grin, approving it as perfect now that the ventilation hole had yanked the stale air away, and the room finally breathed. He unleashed Mappa's whirling blades, machines that generated tidal energy, to blast a constant rush of fresh air through the place. Fuller snapped that she just wanted to get back to mining, and he swore he'd share that view. He slammed the brakes on them. Yesterday's attack was still raw, and he wanted to wait a little longer. Sated, she strode alone to the forge, while he wrestled with a plan to let everyone mine safely. He set out to create new golems and swore they'd be far more precise this time. So he crouched and etched a golem's design into the earth. He got swept into a frenzy and unleashed a design forged entirely from orichalcum. Swords, bow guns, magic stones piled into every slot. His grin exploded into full-blown ridiculousness, and Rihanna stepped in to see what he was doing. He jumped when she suddenly appeared. Her quick apology slammed into his concentration as he was undoing his work. She leaned in and asked if he had some time, and he nodded. He said yes. She dragged him along with her. Words like that almost never fell from her lips. She leaned in, whispered for him to tail her like a shadow, and together they slipped off toward her farm. Shock slammed into him when he realized the place she'd taken him was the plantations. Apples and grapes had multiplied many times over, and now lemons and palm trees had sprung up everywhere. He hailed Rihanna as a magnificent orchid, and she thanked him, visibly moved that he'd praised her efforts. She announced they still didn't have enough for everyone, then her eyes lit up. She had an idea. She focused like a laser, then drove a thunderous punch into the coconut tree. A coconut plummeted from the tree, then she leapt skyward and she unleashed razor kicks that sliced them down, every move forged in General Elvin's martial arts training. Shock slammed into him when he caught this side of her as she seized lemons and squeezed their sharp juice straight into the coconut juice. She diluted it with water, certain they'd savor it in small, controlled sips. He couldn't fathom where she'd pulled that much power from, then snatched a sip of the juice she'd just prepared. He froze, spellbound by the juice's flavor because it contained. The flavor exploded, sweet and bright acidity locked in perfect balance, outshining the juice he'd had earlier. Then the shore erupted with noise, slamming into him. It belonged to Elvin, who'd just taken down the shell monster. There it was, the Satan shell he'd obliterated earlier at the back of the island. Elvin barked a warning, "Keep your guard up if you stumble on one," and he sneered that prying them open to deal with them would be child's play. Varys snapped that no one else should try. Only Elvin, by virtue of his power, could pull it off. Varys crushed the shell, squeezed a slimy thing free, and snapped, "What is it?" Mappa snapped a quick taste and crumpled to the ground. It was the numbing liquid seething inside Satan's shell, the very venom the shell drenches its prey with. Varys smirked and quipped that the poison could turn deadly in an instant. He smirked, called it a joke, then dropped that you could tap it for purple dye. After that, he sealed his domain and fortified every wall against killer birds, Satan shells, and invading domains. He forged 14 golems and branded each with a stark number, 1 through 14. Numbers 6 through 15 pulsed with magic stones, 2 others mastered defensive magic, and the final pair seized one of the 4 attributes. The Watcher slammed the danger bell, its iron cry tearing through the air and warning everyone that more Satan shells were coming. They slammed into them through the unfinished section of the wall. 50 of them loomed before the group, and doubt ignited. Could they possibly take on every last one? Hiel locked eyes with Varys and demanded, "Where are they weakest?" He warned him the Satan shells would shatter the moment lightning struck. He told Elvin to step aside. He wanted to test the brand new golems he'd just made. Elvin agreed and told Hiel to call him the moment trouble flared. Rihanna flashed a grin and jumped in, offering to join him. She wielded lightning magic too. Hiel bellowed, summoning golem number 1 and standing shoulder to shoulder with 6 and 7, and with 14 and 15. He charged headlong into battle against the Satan shells. Shells ripped from the walls, battering the golems and crashing into Hiel. He barked at 6 and 7, raised shield spells and guard them. Rihanna unleashed a crackling bolt of lightning that tore them apart in an instant. Elvin and Varys watched the battle with the Satan shells unfold as golems stomped like mobile fortresses, shrugging off blows with iron endurance. Hiel barked orders to 14 and 15, and they unleashed jagged lightning bolts ripping straight at them. The shells groaned as pressure slammed into them, forcing their liquids out, but golems surged into place and shielded them with effortless force, and the same. The process thundered on as the shells were ignited at the end. Relief slammed into Elvin as the golems shielded Hiel from the numbing liquid with ruthless precision. The ordeal snapped shut in a heartbeat, ending far sooner than he'd ever expected. Golems hammered the battlefield with unstoppable magic the whole fight, and he showered praise on everyone, Rihanna included, for their help. When the dust settled, a handful of shells still lay where they'd fallen, and blasted a jet of numbing liquid into the Hiel from behind. Rihanna spotted it at the last second and hurled herself between them, shielding him with her body. Elvin smashed the shell aside and suddenly realized Rihanna was pressed against him, her body slick with numbing liquid. Numbness crashed through her, locking every muscle and freezing her in place. He healed her on the spot, and she thanked him, relief shaking her voice. She blurted she was sticky from head to toe now, and he figured. Sensing she felt gross from it, he sprinted to grab her a glass of water. As he hurried along, his gaze snagged on a pair curled up inside a shell. You'd go ages without spotting one in Satan's shells. Then it would show up and stop you cold with its breathtaking beauty. Hiel thrust the pair at Rihanna, convinced they'd suit her perfectly. Heat flooded her face. She fumbled, stammering as she handed the PR back. They hurled the pearl back to him, then sprinted away. He knew he couldn't give it to her yet, so he clenched it and kept it hidden. The next day, while mining, break hit and he slammed his pick down, Fula and Shell right there beside him. Full refused to rest and tore into the soil, digging ever deeper. He fired a quick reminder to eat, and she waved him off with a grin, swearing she could never skip anything made by a princess. He stationed golem number 9 at the bell, ready to slam it the moment trouble erupted. Shielded by the golem, they plunged back into the mine. He watched Fula blaze with more vigor than anyone, then they raced off to Rihanna to eat. Today's meal exploded with the devilish Satan shell's course. It pulsed with an irresistible lure that dragged them back again and again, unable to break free. Satan's shells built nests right beside them, supplying vivid dyes, steady food, and shells as tough as armor. But the currents around the shield reef surged and lashed like a living storm. A monstrous body hurtled straight at them. Then they swarmed the Tyrian purple, inspecting every inch like it held a secret. That fabric the very stuff nobles flaunted, lit a fire in him, and he set out to craft their outfits from it. Elvin strode into the room, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He fixed Hiel with a hard look and urged him to follow into the reclaimed land. He sprinted to the spot to find out what had happened, and when he arrived the scene slammed into him. A dead orc, apparently snagged in the embankment's clutch, had been ripped loose and dragged here. Recognition slammed into him. The seal on the orc's hand belonged to the very tribe that had razed their hometown to smoldering ash. Rage exploded in the other goblins as they surged forward, raining brutal kicks down on its corpse. Their own kind had dragged them down into a pit of misery. He barreled in to stop them, but they flat-out ignored him. He convinced himself he had no right to stop them. Their tribes had been wiped out. Princess Rhys slammed her palm down, freezing everyone in their tracks, and fury tore through her when she caught goblins stomping on a corpse, a savage stain on their tribe's pride. The goblins snarled that these orcs had burned their tribes to ash, and that was only the beginning. They also hoisted their king's corpse into the square and displayed it as a grisly warning. She vowed they'd never stoop to the orcs' savage ways. She made it clear Hiel should be the one to decide how to deal with this. The matter done, she poured out an apology to him for the inconvenience. Gratitude roared through him. He thanked her. He felt exactly as she'd told everyone. He clenched his jaw and decided he'd seize command if he were chief right now. He could tell they were seething, frustration boiling over and anger primed to explode. He wouldn't let them sink to the humiliation of kicking a corpse. He bowed his head and implored everyone to listen and rein in their anger. Shame seared through them. Their actions had forced their boss to bow his head. Elven and Varys snapped, "Lift your head now." Then Hel thrust the grim duty onto Varys, "Bury the orc's corpse." The truth hit him. This body wasn't the only one, others lay strewn around. The ocean lay smothered in corpses, bodies bobbing everywhere across the surface. They dragged every lifeless body into the open. Some kobolds poured in too, bitter enemies of the goblins, charging into battle alongside the orcs. He'll ask if orcs and kobolds had clashed, but that can't explain why they turned up out here, stranded in this god-forsaken stretch of wilderness. Elven came racing in and told him that something was terribly wrong. Every dead body's battle wounds were grotesque, like cruelty had been carved into flesh. Scars ripped across the skin in ways no axe or sword could make. He insisted only fangs could cause such wounds, but they were monstrous, fangs that big he'd never seen. Half of several orcs' bodies had been ripped away. He snapped, so Elven saying they were attacked by something else. Doubt gnawed at Elven, so he urged them to shore up their defenses and watch for the arm ships. The Cave King was equally in the dark. He pinned the grim duty of the burials on Varys and anointed Elven commander of the defenses. Rihanna and he tore through the wreckage, grabbing anything usable to survive by any means. Everything around here was a wreck, rotting, rusting, and crumbling at the seams. A sound ripped through the quiet. He whipped toward Rihanna and snapped, "Rihanna, was that your voice?" And they froze. The voice erupted from the treasure chest instead. He grinned, slid out his picks, and danced them through the chest's lock until it snapped open. The box flew open, and something shot out in an instant. He scooped it into his hands, and there it was, a puppy. The puppy instantly bounded across his body, tiny paws a frantic blur as it ran all over him. He locked eyes with Rihanna and asked, "What should I do here?" But the puppy blasted his clothes with a sudden spray of pee, and panic exploded through him as Rihanna laughed at him. She vowed she'd wash his clothes. Then he whipped his head and stared at the impossibly cute puppy. Rihanna pleaded with everyone, desperate for them to see the baby kobold had done nothing wrong. She knew the whole tribe had to grasp it. Every single member had to step up and care for the baby kobold. The next day he'll plunge back into the mine, tearing more minerals straight from the stone. He reveled in wielding Mappa's new special orichalcum ice axe. A cold dread clawed at him at the thought of a battle brewing on the coastal waters, and with no answer yet, he doubled down and kept mining. He plunged into the earth, ripping out minerals and hoarding raw ore to fortify the island's defenses. He snatched them up and tore through his inventory again and again. He noticed the flow of magic stones was dwindling. He hunted down every last one to supercharge Rihanna's magic, stashing a few away because Fula and Varys would need them someday. He was stuck, powerless to act for now. His gaze snapped to a strange relic he'd just unearthed while mining. He had no clue what it was. The Cave King crest refused to reveal anything to him, because it wasn't a stone at all, it was a seed. He said it, then Fula strode up and called him out, and he snapped, "You here to mine too?" She grabbed his arm and blurted that the baby kobold was in trouble. It kept wailing nonstop, even when Elven gave it his all, contorting his face into every ridiculous expression to squeeze a laugh out of him. When nothing worked, Taryn barreled in to force a laugh from the baby kobold, but the little one just kept crying. Fula burst in and booted Elven when his funny faces twisted into something terrifying and made the baby wail even louder. Money, Elven confessed he'd pulled the exact same stunt just to hear her erupt into baby laughter. Hiel sneered that he'd only been trying to scare him, and Elven strode forward to welcome his boss. Baby Kobold's eyes snapped to Hiel the instant he appeared. He barreled over and immediately started fiddling with Hiel. Turns out the baby kobold had stood watch over Hiel, who'd been wailing the moment he woke from his nap. Rihanna shot back that the baby kobold might already see him as its father, reminding him the pee he did on Hiel earlier might have been the baby kobold marking him. Varys warned that baby kobolds instinctively latch onto the first creature they encounter. Then he'll glare and demand to know what he was doing with the chest the baby was found in. Varys warned him the chest was far shallower than they'd assumed. The inside flatly betrayed the depth its exterior promised, so he suspected a false bottom, and we slammed an orichalcum knife into the seam and pried like mad, but it wouldn't budge, even though the bottom was just wood. A cold certainty gripped Hiel. These cases almost always hid special locks. He unleashed a spell and wrenched the false bottom open. They burst into relieved cheers. It worked, and he pulled the items out. Stashed inside a fake bottom, cobbled from 3 battered books about the history. He tore through the Tyrus tribe's history, techniques, and scriptures and snatched a white stone. From the book titles he peeled back the secrets of their clan, and curiosity clawed at him as his crest flared, screaming the truth. It was the Thought Stone, a gem that stores thoughts. Elvin and Rihanna slammed him with the question, "What is it?" while Varys already seemed to know about it. The stone erupted into a blinding blaze and instantly activated. A hologram of a female kobold snapped into being. He gaped, pulse hammering, desperate to know who she was. Rihanna, alongside him, found her stunning. Cobalt and recorded thought waited like forbidden spoils for anyone daring enough to crack the chest's seal. She declared she was Alhamina, queen of the Tyrus tribe, and revealed the cobalt baby hidden in the chest was her newborn. Rage blazed in Elvin toward the Tiberius tribe, but he stayed silent and only listened to the message. She pressed on, voice cracking with urgency. She didn't have much time left. She kept shrieking that the legendary beast Leviathan was chasing their ship. They were already spent from the earlier battle with the orcs. Swords skidded and spells sputtered uselessly against the beast, leaving them with no way to break free from its clutches. She implored whoever opened the chest to become the foster parents of her baby. She promised, accept, and she'll hand over their 2 fiercest warriors, the chest's own guardians, and the forbidden secret books outsiders were never allowed to see. She begged them to guard her baby with everything they had, and if fate allowed, to let him hear her last words one day. It hit like a confession, Alhamina pouring out a raw, heartfelt message declaring her fierce love for the baby. Her smile and message hit the baby like a burst of sunlight. He felt them, but he was still too tiny for them to sink in. When the recorded thought ended, silence slammed down and everyone's minds sprinted through what might have happened to those Tiberius. Rage boiled in Elvin. They'd dumped their kid on someone else, and he didn't even have the escorts she'd promised. Rihanna barked at Elvin to cut it out, and he sprinted to the watchman's post to warn him about the situation. Hiel's blood ran cold. He just realized they already knew about Tybris. Fula leaned in and unleashed the tale of how the Tybris and Belden tribes had been locked in a generations-long clash, warring tooth and nail over every scrap of territory. Grief slammed into her when she learned her brother had also fallen in that war. Relief crashed over Hiel when Elvin, even after hearing the recorded didn't glare at the baby cobalt. Fula stared him down and swore her father would never hate a child. Varys fell into step and cut in. General Elvin blamed himself for failing to protect his son. The war ripped Varys' brother away, yet he harbored no grudge against the baby. The words slammed into Hiel, and he swore right then to take the baby under his wing from now on. It snapped on, and everyone else erupted into smiles. He then spun to them and shouted, "What should we name the baby?" And even the recorded thought left his name blank. Rihanna admitted she might have purposely left the baby nameless, daring whoever found him to claim him as their own. He spins to her and blurts, "Got any name ideas?" She hesitated a beat, then boldly suggested he call the baby Real. He seized the name with a grin, and from that heartbeat the baby cobalt was called Real. They branded the baby as one of the tamed he hadn't meant to be. He grinned, certain it was perfect. The baby would grow up in the caves with them. Fuller couldn't resist roasting Rihanna for stitching the baby's name together from bits of her name and heels. Rihanna's cheeks flamed the instant that comment hit her ears. After that, Varys' voice went cold as he warned there was another matter that had to be dealt with now, and it was deeply troubling. They now learned the Mark of Giants could blast half a body away and render its bearer immune to every weapon. Every gaze snaps to the colossal, legendary beast, Leviathan. After some time, Mappa unveiled a bold new invention and dared Hiel to strike it with his magic. Hiel blinked and asked if he was sure. Once he'd confirmed it, he unleashed a searing, full-force blast of flame magic straight into it. The new invention revealed itself as a massive shield, clutched in the golem's hands. It unleashed raw power dwarfing his shield magic, and he suddenly knew he could rely on it. Her gaze slammed onto it. She snapped at the others. "What were you doing?" Garrison leaned in and revealed another jaw-dropping Mappa creation, a weapon built to shield the island even from giant monsters. Anxiety coiled in Hiel as he jabbed at Varys. Is the Leviathan real or just a myth? And Elvin scoffed that he didn't believe it either. Queen Alhamino's elite soldiers were no match for the beast. It tore through them, obliterated their ranks, and proved their fears painfully justified. Then he'll snap to Riel's bark and whirl around to check. He perched high atop the construction logs. Elvin spotted him stuck there and lunged forward to yank him to safety. He hurtled downward but still snatched Riel to safety, and Rihanna's relief surged when she saw both Riel and General Elvin safe. Elvin's instincts screamed that Riel could be out in the fields with her right then. She said Riel was a live wire in the field, digging nonstop and darting everywhere so she couldn't keep up. Varys warned that cobalt children used to shoot up at terrifying speed. Riel would be on her own two legs before long. Surprise sparked in Hiel, then memories from the fields slammed into him. He jabbed the seed he'd found earlier into view, produced the sea, and demanded Varys tell him everything he knew about it. Varys froze, his mind scrambling. He couldn't tell which seed it was. Rihanna's shout sliced the silence. "That's the Yggdrasil seed." Shock slammed into Hiel and Varys. Rihanna herself gasped, eyes wide and trembling. Pressed on how she knew, she swore the secret had escaped her lips before she could catch it. Turns out her farmer's crest wasn't just a symbol. It flooded her with encyclopedic knowledge of every plant. Varys then revealed he'd known about Yggdrasil all along. A titanic tree that poured blessings over every living creature, its existence whispered only in legend. It burst into a new form, mirroring the changed stone that followed. Hiel circled the island, scouring cliffs and coves until he found the perfect spot to mine. He tore into the ground and carved a path there, eyes flashing as he spotted the perfect opportunity. They carved a field for themselves, and he had enough materials to build it. He barked at the spiders, unleashing them to carry out the retrieval. His collecting function only kicked in inside the cave, so he needed help removing the dirt. Then he launched straight into working on the place and stayed at it for a while. That very night he finished carving out a fresh patch of reclaimed land for them, charged to its center, and drove the Yggdrasil seed into the waiting earth. Rihanna tagged along, plunged her hands into the soil, and began planting flowers. She'd scattered seeds from her hometown all over the place, and his grin burst. This was going to be perfect. Mopper exploded into view from nowhere, eyes glued to the Yggdrasil as it was planted. Rihanna's eyes slammed onto the Yggdrasil seed as it exploded into green shoots, sprouting far faster than it had any right to. He cornered them and demanded if they'd used the sunstone. Neither had. He resolved this was the moment. They had to try the sunstone now. She unleashed it on the plant, and it shot up into a full-grown tree in mere seconds. It hit him like a thunderclap. The sunstone was a blazing marvel. Suddenly the tree kept growing, exploding skyward and ballooning into monstrous size at breakneck speed. He pressed Rihanna, voice razor-sharp, asking if she'd truly used only one sunstone. Rihanna met his stare and agreed. It hit them hard. This explosive growth had turned the tree into a hazard, so staying nearby would be suicide for now. They bolted, sprinting a few frantic paces to put distance between themselves and the tree. Mappa sprinted full tilt and slammed into the dirt then. Then the tree surged over him, its limbs and leaves swallowing him from head to toe. It ballooned out of control, forcing Rihanna and Hiel to snatch themselves away at the last second, tumbling back to a safe distance. Before long, the tree shot to full height, swelling into a colossus that loomed into view from the other reclaimed land. Elvin and Varys caught sight of it looming on the island's far side. Rihanna and Hiel gaped, jaws dropping as the tree loomed above them, impossibly massive. It ripped open the truth and showed exactly why they called it Yggdrasil, the legendary tree. After that, a memory slammed into Hiel, a tiny monster, mercilessly tormented by a pack of boys. They unleashed attack after attack on the poor thing, bound in chains. Every spare moment, they'd pounce on it and tear it apart. Their leader was the boy, Orin, and they relentlessly hammered out a magic attack aimed squarely at the small thing. Even if every last one of them hailed from the elite magic academy. They refused to kill the monster, landing slow, sporadic blows that chipped it down bit by brutal bit. He once quaked at their presence, and that terror froze him from daring any move against them. He bided his time. They'd finished it and returned to the academy. He kept returning to the monster, then you find out he'd even given it a name, Lopes. He owned up to nursing Lopes day after day, voice raw with apology, his healing magic faltered. It wasn't strong enough to heal Lopes this time. Time bled away as Lopes' wound festered beyond healing, and his shackles refused to budge. He knew Lopes would be killed at this rate. He planted himself at his side, waiting until Oran barreled back with his goons, and Oran snarled. What's Hiel doing standing in front of Lopes? He tore the words from his throat and begged Orin for one desperate favor. Stop this and set Lopes free. Orin bristled, ripped off his glove, and slammed it onto the heel with a sharp crack. Hiel dropped to his knees, pleading for Lope's release even though Lope was royalty. Orin snapped, fury boiling in his veins. He barked at Hiel to move aside, sneering that he was a powerless man, and snarled he'd turn Hiel and the Lobes to ashes. He had no choice. He sank to his knees and begged for Lope's life. We begged Orin again and again, each pleas louder than the last. Orin scoffed. The man's pathetic begging bored him to the bone, and unleashed Hiel, granting him free rein to do whatever he wanted. Hiel gaped as Oran suddenly flipped his decision, smirking that the training bored him and he was done with the monster. Joy surged through him the instant those words reached his ears. Orin snapped for him to sprint over and pry Lope's shackles open. He declared Hiel had free rein, do whatever he wanted. If he chose to free Lope's, nobody would stand in his way. He wouldn't let a monster prowl the capital. If Lope showed up again, he'd snuff it out instantly. Orin gave Hiel 10 seconds to make his move. He reached for the Lobes, every instinct screaming to free them, but he knew he couldn't, and Oran dove into a countdown from 10 without hesitation. As the count hurtled downward, Hiel sprint into action, desperate to save the Lobes. He fought to undo the shackles, jimmied them with picks until his hands were raw, but the locks refused to surrender. Lopez's breath hitched as icy certainty sank in. He was about to die. The counting hit 0 and Lopez's grin snapped straight at the heel. A heartbeat later, Lopez disintegrated into ash, and he crumpled into despair as Lopes fell dead before his eyes. Orin branded him a monster for letting his friend die like that. He felt in his bones from the start that he couldn't lift a finger to save Lopes. He lunged to strike Orin, but crashed into Orin's shield and couldn't even get close. Hail seethed at Orin while Orin crumpled into sobs, grief ripping him apart over Lopes. Oran snapped at Hiel, his words razor clear, someone as weak as him. Not even a menacing glare could hope to touch someone as strong as him. Memory slammed back. He'd come to on a bed in a medical building. He hauled himself up and stumbled back to that room, and Lope's remains still lay where they'd been. The locket at his throat cradled the ashes of Lobes he'd loved. Guilt gnawed at him for a promise he couldn't keep, and he faced Rihanna, laying himself bare. This was the real him. She snapped, "You're not powerless, not even close." She snapped, reminding him he'd poured himself into the Belden tribe, and into supporting Riel and Lopez too. He poured every ounce of himself into helping others, and tears welled in her eyes as she listened to his story. She choked out an apology to him. He'd already been through so much. His pulse jumped. Why had he just unleashed that story on her now? And it slammed into him. He wanted nothing more than someone to listen to it. Rihanna's sobs quieted and vanished within moments. Riel bounded up to them, grin wide and cheerfulness spilling from every step. They sprang to their feet and charged into the encircling trees, racing to cut across to the far side. He faced them, heart blazing, and knew there was only one thing he wanted, to tell Rihanna his story. Once they crashed through the trees, the fields erupted into a riot of flowers everywhere. All across Rihanna's hometown, Riel burst into a whoop and dashed in wild circles across the field, pure joy fueling every step. Rihanna called Hiel out and ripped into him, telling him there was no erasing the regrets he carried for Lopez. From now on, when the nights get brutal, he must carry one truth. She and everyone will always have his back. Solitude shattered as a large family surrounded him. Gratitude surged through him for Rihanna. He sent Varys to pry deeper into the Yggdrasil tree, and Varys unearthed that its leaves could be brewed into tea and pressed into salve. Binge on it and you'll spiral into a daze. Tread carefully. Featherlight yet steel tough, the tree's branches held firm enough to be worked by orichalcum tools. They even dared to forge orichalcum into handles for ice axes. After blitzing through task after task, the hours blurred and dinner time slammed into them, so he shouted to Fully that dinner was ready. She insisted she wasn't tired yet. He declared she could continue the next day. She nodded, slotted her pickaxe back into place, and he realized Yggdrasil's branches drained exhaustion too. The tree poured blessings over everyone, and his pulse hammered with excitement at the thought of harvesting the new crops. Those flower fields were always bursting into bloom. Joy surged through him as their life on the island flourished, and before long Riel drifted into sleep. He crashed into bed, mind racing, already bracing for what would gnaw at him tomorrow. He jolted awake at dawn and saw Riel acting strangely, tears carving tracks down her face. His sobs split the silence, and people rushed over to see what had broken him. Hiel blurted that Riel might be trapped in a nightmare. Rihanna darted to his side, desperate to soothe him. But unease gnawed at him, healing. No. A strange mark blazed in Riel's left eye. It unmasked itself as a crest, and in the next heartbeat, their surroundings exploded into blinding white. Riel's mark blasted razor-sharp signals straight into others' brains. His memory dragged them into the day the Tyrus tribe met their end. Many kobolds littered aboard, dead and chopped apart. Ulhamina hurled herself between the beast and the others, a living shield taking every brutal strike to keep them safe. The monster's strength overwhelmed her. It ripped her barrier apart with brutal ease. She snatched the staff into her right hand and fought to hoist the shield back up. Her desperate strike failed. The monster lunged, swallowing her whole and ripping half the ship into its maw. The mere sight of the monster clawed at Hiel, nearly buckling him to his knees, and it froze Rihanna the same. Every eye locked on the Leviathan as its brutal, deadly force slammed into them. The image hit him like a punch. Cold sweat exploded across his skin as terror seized him. Very snapped, voice cold. He already knew the crest burning in Riel's eyes was called Clairvoyance. They swore this crest was the all-seeing eye of God. Every scene they'd just witnessed had already flashed through Riel's eyes. Before he parted ways with his mother, Claire's power flared, electrifying their farewell. Clairvoyance tore through the island, blasting every mind with Leviathan's raw, terrifying power. Dread coiled around the island as residents feared a Leviathan strike and scrambled to figure out how they'd possibly fight back. Worry gnawed at them, and at him just the same. He, too, had no clue what he'd do if Leviathan showed up here. Could he actually shield every single one of them? Elvin bellowed, straining to tell. Everyone dropped the sour faces and remember every scar and sacrifice they've endured to get here. If they joined forces with Hiel, nothing could stand in their way. He kept everyone's faith in Hiel burning bright. He shot to his feet, faced them, barked for silence, and ordered everyone to steady themselves and fortify the island against a possible attack. It might not come, but they couldn't risk ignoring a legendary beast. No force, no matter how mighty, could shatter their united stand. They'd rise as one and defy it. He implored everyone to pour their strength into him. He spoke, his mind flaring to life as he plotted his next move. Watching Ulhamina's brutal clash with Leviathan, realization slammed into him. His magic would shatter uselessly against it. We grilled MAPPA. Would orichalcum weapons actually work? Mappa froze. The team flooded the project with every idea they had. He tore through his thoughts, desperate to pry open a path through it. He first hatched the plan to plunge into the shadowed depths inside. In the cave where he found the golem, he hatched a plan to turn the stone giant into his refuge. They could bolt a freezer right beside it and cram it full of supplies. But Elvin warned the island could crumble if the beast slammed into it and urged everyone to fall back. Hiel chimed in, grinning. He'd already cooked up an idea for that, too. He set to work, carving the place into something forged for an entirely different purpose. Itching to unearth new materials, he rallied the others and mapped out a bold plan to start digging. All this time, the island had exploded into life, its rise driven by new discoveries unearthed deep beneath its soil. Doubt gnawed at him. Sheol Reef still hid secrets. Something slumbered beneath its caves that could rise to challenge a Leviathan. Doubt gnawed at him. He wouldn't know unless he tried, so Vera suggested he take Riella along this time. He figured his clairvoyance could tip the scales. We bolted out, Riel tucked into his bag. Barely into their search, Riel crashed into a dead sleep, doing nothing. Convinced Riel would wake any moment, he dashed off to explore on his own. The entire island rallied as one. Villagers, sailors, and blacksmiths racing to cobble together a dozen desperate defenses to stand against the Leviathan. Iggdrasil cranked out wood like a cosmic lumber mill, so they never had to worry about lumber again. Soon crews hammered the final stones into place, and the defensive walls loomed almost complete. Riel snapped awake and unleashed a flurry of barks, jolting him. He guessed Riel might have found something. All that chaos, then the kicker, he just had to pee. Through the whole exploration, Riel brooded, his clairvoyant gaze slicing clean through the bedrock. He'll finally trust his skills. When Riel unearths huge veins of ore, he couldn't even locate himself. After a few weeks, Riel snapped to life, crackling with energy as he jabbed the air and fixated on a single spot. And Fulo gaped, convinced Riel was about to start digging right there. They slammed into a snag. The spot had no optimization light, and he swallowed hard, wondering if it would be all right. He knew in his bones Riel had uncovered something. He knew that if he landed a single, precise strike there, it would be okay. The instant he crashed into the earth, he plunged into a hidden cave, which was lurking right beneath that spot, and there he stumbled upon a colossal suit of armor sprawled like a fallen giant, a sword 5 times his size lying across it. A cold punch of realization hit him. The thing in the armor was a golem, its chest still without a heart stone, the plates gleaming like forged orichalcum. The sword thrummed, as if forged from something even stronger. He edged closer, desperate to get a close look at the sword's uncanny metal. We slammed his pickaxe into it, and the strike erupted into a deafening, metallic roar. A thunderous boom ripped through the entire cave and slammed into Mappa's ears. He'll realize he can't just snap the sword as it is. The blade's metal mocks him, tougher than even orichalcum. Out of nowhere, Mappa materialized behind him like a ghost. He slipped in without noticing. When Mappa's gaze slammed onto the sword, his eyes exploded open, awestruck by what he saw. Joy exploded inside him, and he fell to his knees, worshipping it. Fuller and Hiel exchanged a sharp, charged look, racked with questions. What was going on, and why was Mappa suddenly so much more excited than usual? Mappa shouldered the colossal sword, climbed to the surface alone, and hauled it straight to be processed. Mappa then plunged into forging the sword, his hammer rising and falling in a thunderous chorus with the other smiths. He hit a wall. The other smiths warned Hiel the forge couldn't blaze hot enough to melt the sword. Rihanna slammed into the room, eyes snapping to the sword. He'll beg her to help him melt the sword by. He poured his magic into the furnace, fusing his energy with its roaring power. They blasted the furnace with raw flame magic, its power exploding manyfold, and they plunged the sword into that roaring inferno without hesitation. Once the melting succeeded, the molten material gushed out. After he'd reduced it to raw material, he pinched off a sliver and scanned it like a hawk. It was mithril, the gods' lost, toughest metal, deadly enough to slay even gods and hungry to be infused with magic. Triumph surged through Hiel. He'd pulled it off, and he spun to reel with a grateful roar, thanking him for helping him find it. He was certain Mappa would seize the mithril and forge, the greatest weapon any day now. At last the defensive wall snapped into place, and the reclaimed land had hardened into a fortress, exactly what they needed. Facing a legendary beast, they kept hatching daring backup plans to bring it down. Hiel hurled himself into the opening of his first, greatest battle. Late that night, he caught Elven with Riel. Rihanna crept up behind him, pressed a finger to her lips, and gestured for absolute silence as they watched what unfolded. While Riel crashed to his knees, begging Riel's forgiveness for the vicious words he'd spat about his mother earlier. He nodded, admitting she was a fearsome warrior, then urged him to keep watch. Together they'd avenge his mother. Hiel and Rihanna overheard him, and in a heartbeat everything snapped into brutal reality. Riel nicely jammed his hand into his eyes, which, pain flared, ripping a tiny scream free, and now the tide had finally turned. Deep down they had one desperate play, bet it all on Sheol's savage strength if Leviathan dared to rise. After a tense wait, the watchmen hammered the alarm bells, a piercing cry ripping across the town. And he'll explode into a sprint to find out what it was, Elvin told. News hit him. 2 ships had been spotted on the ocean. Varys shoved a telescope into his hands and dared him to look with his own eyes. He pressed his eye to the telescope and froze as the very same emblem stared back. The orc warband that had attacked the Belden tribe before turned out to be the battered survivors of a shattered orc clan. Rage erupted in Elven. If they meant to attack the island, he swore he wouldn't let them take it. A colossal shape erupted from the ocean, looming far off the fleet, and the nearest ship tore into it with a thunderous barrage. And he'll catch sight of ships suddenly bolting, hulls pounding the waves as they flee from something. Riel let loose a fierce bark, and Hiel's mind snapped into place. He understood. Something was very wrong here. He felt a monstrous, roaring tide of magic surging up from the sea right now. What they saw next hit like a thunderclap, freezing everyone with mouths agape in pure terror. The legendary beast Leviathan surged from the sea, its vast black shadow clawing at the heavens, a brutal proof of its colossal size, and its bone-rattling roar threw the surrounding waters into savage frenzy. Orcs aboard the ship roared, hacking and heaving with every ounce of strength to stand against the Leviathan. Their bullets pinged off its surface, useless by this point. Slaying this ferocious beast seemed all but impossible. He vowed to save the remaining ship, and Elvin slammed the bell, a jagged clang ripping through the room and yanking every eye toward him. He shouted for them to stop standing idle and snap into the battle positions they'd been drilling all week. Hiel feared saving the orcs, their sworn enemies, would slam a crushing weight onto Elvin's shoulders. Elvin snapped that he wasn't risking himself for those orcs. He was seizing the chance to strike the Leviathan while it was locked onto the ship. Understanding struck Hiel, and he snapped orders to Fula. He roared the order for everyone to rush toward the cave, exactly as planned. Fula obeyed him and barked at every fighter, "Don't die, no matter what." Hiel, brimming with confidence, flashed a grin as his smiling team launched themselves into war against the Leviathan. Varys slipped in behind them, then snapped crisp orders to ready the heavyweight ballista. It wrenched out a massive arrow as goblins hustled shoulder to shoulder, cranking the ballista into deadly readiness. A gleaming mithril arrow sat on it. Mappa poured his very soul into forging it, and it could pierce through anything. They leveled the arrow and locked Leviathan in their sights. Leviathan surged toward the ship. Spotting their opening, they seized the moment and loosed the arrow. The arrow screamed through the air at blistering speed, and just as it was about to strike the Leviathan, the beast slipped aside effortlessly, the arrow slicing through empty air. Kyle knew the cannonballs would ping off like pebbles, but one mithril arrow would bring it crashing down, so Leviathan snapped aside. The arrow snagged Leviathan's gaze, and it zeroed in on Sheol as its primary target. Hiel shouted for everyone to load the next arrow. He pinned the Leviathan with a swarm of golems and told Rihanna to ready their next strategy. He slammed forth golems 10 and 11 draped in jagged ice, then tore the sky open to unleash 12 and 13 as howling wind behemoths. They locked eyes, fused their powers, and unleashed a cataclysmic mega blizzard that slammed into the Leviathan. Leviathan didn't flinch or falter. It barreled on at the exact same relentless speed. Realizing magic would utterly fail, they seized a bold, unexpected alternative. They planned to lock the water around it in ice, and Hiel flashed a grin, convinced they'd be fine if they pulled it off. It froze rigid, completely immobilized, and to his surprise, the Leviathan blasted the ice into flying shards and charged a blinding hyper beam. He sensed the situation tipping and barked for shield golems 6 and 7 to angle their shields just so, deflecting the strike instead of taking it head-on. As Leviathan charged, it blasted the immense with a cataclysmic shot. The instant the titanic beam slammed into the defenses, while the beam slammed into the golem's shields, battering their warding magic too. They hurled every last ounce of strength just to hold their ground behind the shield. It unleashed bone-rattling shockwaves that sent the whole area into a trembling roar. The shield shredded, jagged shards flaking from its rim as the damage relentlessly ate through it. They poured every ounce of strength into a desperate last-ditch push and by a hair shoved the attack off course. The ocean detonated in a colossal blast, hurling a towering wall of water and spray into the sky. They were hanging by a thread, and Leviathan, and was already charging toward them again. Rihanna shouted that the heavyweight ballista was ready again, and Elvin braced himself, primed to fire it. Hiel's gut screamed. Leviathan kept barreling at them, daring them, convinced it could dodge the arrow even at point-blank range. They loosed the arrow. This time they were armed with a new tactic. The distraction ripped Leviathan's gaze away, and the arrow slipped past him unseen. Everyone held their breath for the result. Then an arrow sliced the silence. The arrow slammed into the Leviathan and ripped clean through its hulking body. Rihanna whispered a hiding spell, and the arrow dissolved from sight. The Leviathan never even noticed the invisible strike. Cheers erupted when they finally struck the beast, and Elvin slammed the brakes. Calm down. They'd only pulled it off once so far. They lashed the arrow to an unyielding rope braided from spider silk and steel wires. He roared for everyone to keep pushing and to never let the Leviathan break free. He barked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the beast was hauled closer. As it slammed into the designated area, dozens of golems lurking beneath the waves shot their metal hands skyward, each tethered to thick steel cables. Chains slammed around the Leviathan from every angle as it thrashed and howled, fighting the bonds with savage, relentless fury. It tore into the gears, shredding them until they buckled. They wouldn't hold out much longer. They snapped at Hiel, now, and slammed another arrow into the heavyweight ballista, locking its aim on the creature's head to finish it. As the Leviathan teetered, countless entities ripped free from between its scales and cascaded outward, sweeping across the area and dragging even the golems into the chaos. Hiel's jaw dropped as dozens of tiny sea stalkers swarmed into view. Parasitic monsters clung to colossal sea beasts. They'd been lurking beneath Leviathan's scales the whole time. The parasites were a deadly threat on their own. They shattered the first golem's hands. Hiel slammed out the order to open fire and shoot the sea stalkers down this instant. Stop them before they can do any more damage. They flooded the ramparts, clinging to the defensive wall, and we fought tooth and nail to stop them from climbing over. At the same moment, Leviathan unleashed a furious defense, refusing to yield. The blow tore through them, hurling more golems crashing to the ground. A shock blindsided Hiel. He didn't expect this to happen, and then, suddenly the horns along Leviathan's back shot up, erupting into jagged, nightmarish spires. They could tell it was far deadlier than Ray's earlier attack, and they could do nothing but freeze. Just as they'd predicted, the horns tore free from its body and exploded outward, raining down like a barrage of lethal arrows. He slammed another shield into place, and barked for everyone to dive behind him. Horns crashed down everywhere, each one packed with enough firepower to obliterate the entire wall by itself. The shield barely took the horn's blow. For a split second they dared to breathe, but everything they'd assumed shattered as the Leviathan's tail loomed right in front of them. Out of nowhere it slammed into them. Shock pinned their chests and stole every second they'd need to understand what was happening. The beast's colossal tail crashed onto the area, pulverizing every last thing in its path. Leviathan's tail slammed the cavern, the impact roaring all the way into the deepest recesses where the evacuated residents huddled. The noises shredded their calm, fear clawing at their throats as they begged for it to end. Fear clawed at the kids as they wondered if they were about to lose. Then they were home again. Their mothers brushed aside their fears and promised Master Hiel would swoop in and make everything right again. Leviathan's tail attack obliterated a vast area, erasing every trace like it had never existed. Lucky break, the impact slammed into Hiel and launched him hurtling backward through the air. A shell scooped him up at the last second, cushioning his fall so he landed safely. He snapped upright as memories crashed back. Golem number 6 and Golem number 7 had shielded him before, and he was alive because of them. He hollered for the others, but only a cut-off D answered. Dust choked the air, swallowing every sound. No reply came, and dread clenched his gut. They might be in trouble. Meanwhile, the small sea stalkers swarmed up the wall. They surged around Hiel, encircling him and cutting his options down to almost nothing. Dread slammed into him. If the sea stalkers reached the island, havoc would be unleashed. He pinned them back beneath a storm of roaring thunderbolts. He felt his magic sputter, teetering on the brink of total exhaustion. His attacks withered, their punch gone. He was faltering. As they shoved him into a corner, he roared at Shell, "Make a run for it." Rihanna burst in, weapon roaring, and tore through dozens of sea stalkers, surrounding them in an instant. Relief crashed over Hiel the moment he spotted Rihanna unscathed. She swore nothing would so much as touch her master's heel. Relief tore through him, and he exploded with joy when he realized she was okay. Relief slammed into Rihanna the instant she saw him. He was okay. Right after, a hail of arrows screamed in from behind them, slamming into their backs. They pounced on the sea stalkers. Hiel turned to them. He spun back and saw arrows raining from the others. They were trying to protect Hiel. Relief slammed into him when he saw they were unharmed, and the other goblins and golems were safe too. They surged on the sea stalkers as one, duty burning in their bones to follow Princess Rihanna's lead, and cut down every sea stalker that crossed their path. Elvin blurted an apology to Hiel for being late, but Relief slammed into him. Seeing them safe was all that mattered. The Leviathan roared back to life and unleashed yet another savage rampage. A single strike from it shattered colossal golems into rubble. The beast still towered, and realizing the danger closed in, they were trapped. Hiel snapped they'd unleash their final strategy, and Rihanna told him it was far too dangerous. He steeled himself and launched the plan, odds be damned. Now that the Leviathan pressed tight against the shore, this gambit gave them the best shot. Panic flared in Rihanna. She gripped his hand tight. She poured every last spark of her magic into him. He pulled every trick and risked everything to guarantee the Leviathan's defeat. Hiel seized responsibility and charged into action alone right now. Rage crackled through the beast as it wound up for another savage strike. He clamped a hand over his mouth, snuffing the spell so the magic attack couldn't finish charging. Hiel baited Leviathan, daring it to lock eyes with him. He baited it into a relentless chase. Leviathan erupted in a tidal wave of fury. It launched a full-on chase after Hiel, bulldozing anything in its path, even barreling across land. Hiel was on Tehran now, and shouted for her to sprint to the planned rendezvous with everything she had. Now he stood alone, cut off from any help. They had no choice but to trust him to handle what came next. Elvin's eyes tore across the scene, and he zeroed in on one last way to help. He charged to the massive ballista and heaved its rope, muscles burning as the war machine groaned to life. Varys warned him that the ballista's winch lay shattered, so they couldn't pull the rope back anymore. Watching Hiel throw his life on the line for them, Elvin burned to act. His pride as a great warrior refused to let him stand by and do nothing. He dug his heels in and heaved the rope with every ounce of strength. Mappa slammed in beside him, matching the pull. Leviathan coiled his colossal body around the man's heels, pinning him fast. He barely had time to react when cannons roared to life, shells slamming into the Leviathan. And these were blasted out of that same orc warship we'd seen before, moments later. A mithril arrow screamed through the air and impaled one of Leviathan's eyes. Elvin and Mappa joined forces to shoot it with explosive flare, and now he bolted ahead as the path before him split wide open. At last he slammed into the exact spot he'd picked to spring his trap. He snapped his hand up on cue, the exact signal Riel would mirror with his. Clairvoyance rips the veil, and the signal swells, growing fuller up ahead. She slammed the rock ahead of her, as if it were a move they'd rehearsed, and it detonated a chain reaction that ripped through the cave, leading to. It all exploded into chaos, hurling Leviathan into a savage plunge beneath the cave. The pit gaped, wide enough to swallow a Leviathan whole. Hiel had secretly carved a trap chamber beneath the reclaimed land, primed to catch the beast if the ballista couldn't bring it down. He obliterated the supporting pillars and it. They rigged the whole thing to drag Leviathan down here. Now the final part of the plan landed on him. He would charge in and confront it head-on. He yanked a gleaming mithril pickaxe free. He hurled hundreds of rocks and stones, scattering them across every inch of the ground. The crest asked if he'd mine, and he vowed to channel his boosted power deep in the mines to annihilate the Leviathan. From within, the monster hurled another crackling bolt of sorcery. He darted aside and let the strike whistle past. After that, he rocketed straight at the Leviathan, summoning the Cave King's crushing power to smash it apart. The crest shuddered to life, its sigils snapping awake as it took in his instructions. He tore the pickaxe through the air, channeling the Cave King's full, crushing power into one devastating strike. The mithril pickaxe erupted into the ultimate god-killer metal. His crest flared even brighter. A heartbeat later, everyone above the surface gasped as a blinding light tore out of the ground. It looked like Hiel's pickaxe had slammed into it, blasting that mark into existence. He rocketed down and slammed square onto the legendary Leviathan's head, crushing it into shattered pieces. He lunged and his blade slammed into the beast's weak spot, critical hit. The strike ripped through Leviathan, sending thunderous shockwaves through its colossal body. The impact cracked the Leviathan's entire body wide open. And that's how the Cave King Hiel laid the legendary beast of the legends low. He snatched the rope and began hauling himself toward the surface, but the Leviathan unleashed one final bone-rattling scream that tore through the cave, shaking stone and air. They blasted up to the surface, rattling and cracking the rocks around them. Their hands slipped from the rope and he plummeted, slamming into the ground as blood spilled. Blood gushed from his mouth after he'd endured the maddening roar. Terran snatched the rope again and hauled him to safety. Terran snatched him up as the cave began to give way then. Rihanna hurtled in and dove down, snatching the Hiel to safety. She snatched another thread from Tarn and plucked Hiel right out of midair. She yelled, "Hang on, don't let go until we're out alive and safe." Then he locked eyes with her and rasped, "Cling to me now and you won't make it out." She refused, then urged him fiercely, "Don't give up." They swore to him they'd escape alive. More rocks came crashing down on them from overhead. Out of nowhere, a colossal beast's shadow erupted and slammed down right in front of them. She jolted back, breath snagging, and for a heartbeat the beast held its ground. It snatched them up, cradled them both, and burst out of the cave. They froze, hearts hammering. Who was it and why was it saving them? They surged forward, then a colossal boulder crashed down, blocking their path. The beast thundered, "Don't worry," and tore through the boulder in a heartbeat. They exploded out of the cave into blinding daylight, alive and roaring with relief. He'll demand to know who he was. The beasts froze, jaws unhinged, as humans felled Leviathan. The beasts revealed themselves as kobolds. They'd been shadowing the royal, guarding their highness like savage sentries. They caught his scent and snapped, "Is there a baby sea?" Cobalt tumbled ashore on this island, caged inside a battered box. Elvin barreled over, heart hammering, desperate to see if he was okay. He locked eyes on the kobolds, and recognition slammed into him. It looked like he knew them. They spat out Elvin and Varys, old names, every face knowing their tribe had been driven from the land. Ash and Hein, two cobalt-clad guards, stood sentinel over Riel, eyes locked and unblinking. It hit them, Varys already knew. Those two guards couldn't have missed Elhamina's message, which meant the baby was here. Then Riel barreled toward the Hiel while Ash and Hein erupted in relieved cheers the moment Riel turned up safe. The moment Riel began to heal, Ash and Hein dropped to their knees, their faces alight with pure joy. Seeing Riel unharmed slammed relief into them. But guilt seared their gut. Failing to protect Riel was, they believed, the greatest failure of their lives. Relief lit Hiel's face, but tiny Riel just gaped, too small to understand a thing. Elvin snapped at Ash. "How did we even manage to get to this island?" Ash ripped open the silence and told him exactly how everything had turned out. After 2 days adrift, they teetered on the brink of being swallowed alive by the sea. They were yanked from the jaws of disaster when Camus, an orc pirate of the Corvus tribe, burst in and hauled them to safety. A boat sliced through the waves toward the island, and Elvin jabbed at Ash, snapping, "Weren't you at the war?" Ash declared he had to meet with Camus. Their ship lay crippled and barely sailable, the last bombardment having gutted their ammunition and made it clear to Elvin that revenge would be shockingly easy. Their lives dangled from his fingertips. The boat thundered into view. They barreled onto the island with 2 orcs in tow, then froze, words choked in their throats. Then he stepped forward and thundered, "I am the Lord of Sheol Reef." The other orc growled, Camus, leader of the Corvus tribe. And though their last clash had stunned him, he gaped in disbelief to learn this island crawling with monsters was actually ruled by a human. Camus loomed like a living mountain, fully 3 times Hiel's size, and Hiel was already a colossus among orcs. Camus' gaze locked on Tuel. Elvin snapped that his name had been changed. He snarled that even after they saved them, he still hadn't forgotten they'd raised his hometown, and he seethed over how they'd ever make the orcs pay. Camus shot back, eyes blazing. "We were meant to meet, it's fate." Camus let his sword clatter to the ground, sank to his knees, and offered his life as a final sacrifice. Guilt consumed him for the Corvus tribe's deeds, so he put his own head on the line to save his people. Elvin felt it like a punch. Com had already made up his mind then. The orc behind Camus exploded, yelling that Camus wasn't to blame. The traitor was, and Camus crushed his words with a sudden hand over his mouth. He snarled that they mustn't heap more shame on themselves by abandoning him to die like this. Hiel heard him, then Elvin roared at the crowd to fall silent and listen to Hiel. Hiel leaned into Camus and snapped, "Decide what you must, but I want the truth." Then he opened the floor and let the other orcs speak. He revealed they once had an orc named Claude, the second in command who turned traitor, biding his time until Camus went on expedition, then striking the main base and making off with part of the fleet. Seething at his boss's soft-hearted ways, Claude rallied a horde of orcs to his banner, promising the fortune would give them the power and glory they deserved. Pain tore through him as he watched so many rally to Claude. The moment he heard, he bolted to reclaim the fleet, but it was too late. Claude had already run wild. A cold truth slammed into Hiel. Claude had been the one to strike the Belden tribe. They were locked in battle with Claude, and Leviathan suddenly tore into the very heart of the fight. Shock punches him, the orcs with split bodies. The corpses that washed ashore on his island earlier were from Claude's faction. Elvin reeled. Orcs were famed for chivalry, so their attack felt impossibly wrong, yet they razed his hometown. Camus admitted the tribe's fracture was his failure, guilt burning inside him for allowing the ancestral flag he inherited to be sullied. I felt sorry for him. Elvin swallowed the truth and spat it out. He should have kept his people together. If he had, Belden tribe's home wouldn't have been attacked. Elvin drew his blade and, staring him down, vowed he'd take responsibility. Camus swallowed his pride and kept his word, ready to let Elvin humiliate him. He charges to stop Elvin, and everyone's jaws drop. He unleashed a killing swing, yet Camus survived. He thrust his blade into Camus' hands and dared him to a duel as leader of the Corvus tribe, they embraced the duel. Everyone pressed to the sidelines, breathless and wide-eyed, desperate to see how it would end. A blast of dread hit Hiel. Elvin was up against the orc leader. We figured the least he could do was grab a shield. Rihanna cut him off and shut him down, snuffing out any chance he'd have to interfere with the match. The match raged on as he watched, eyes locked and every nerve razor-focused. Camus locked eyes with Elvin and swore he'd sacrifice himself for the Belden tribe. Now that they were locked in a duel, he swore he'd show no mercy and strike with every ounce of his fury. Elvin loved it and tossed restraint aside, brimming with raw, unapologetic confidence. Goblins, Hiel, Rihanna, and every onlooker locked their gazes on the duel, breaths held as the first strike threatened to shred the silence. Elvin hefted an axe with a pull rope snaking from its haft. Camus flashed his sword, and the duel exploded into life. They exploded into motion, not a single second wasted. They lunged at each other without a second's hesitation, and Camus danced aside as Elvin's axe bit nothing but air. They struck first, slamming a brutal blow into his left shoulder. Another thunderous swing ripped the axe clean from Elvin's grasp. Hiel's eyes shot open as everything barreled forward faster than he could follow. Elvin snatched his weapon back into his hand, eyes blazing as he braced for another brutal bout. Camus snarled, "No one has ever dodged my blade like this." He surged forward again and again, each strike leaving small, stinging cuts. The elven figure bore jagged cuts, each one spidering across a different part of their body. Namu tore through every move with razor-sharp skill, and Fula's heart lurched with dread for her father. Elvin stormed back into the fray, his assault accelerating again as he snapped his weapon out behind Camus this time. Camus clocked the man's attempt to strike from behind. And he already had a counter. He'd deflect the axe mid-swing. He twisted midair, angling his sword a hair and flinging it straight back at the elf himself. 2 attacks hurtled at Elvin now, one from his axe, the other from the Camus sword. He unleashed a move no one saw coming, and gasps ripped through the crowd as spectators stared, mouths agape. He thrust his hand forward and let Camus' blade drive clean through it on purpose. He intended to strip him of every sword technique on the spot, then smash the sword to bits. The battle exploded into a savage showdown of raw, bone-crushing strength. Camus snapped at Elvin. Don't be fooled by his looks, he's still an orc. Orcs routinely crushed goblins the moment a grapple began, overpowering them with brutal ease. He unleashed a brutal onslaught, burying Elvin beneath a storm of strikes as the battle exploded into fierce intensity for them both. Elvin scoffed that he didn't care what you said, he'd make a joke of his strength, faith roaring in him that. Orcs outmuscled a regular goblin, raw muscle and savage power leaving it no chance. Elvin himself bore the mantle of the Belden tribe's great warrior. His warrior crest flared to life, pumping raw strength through his muscles. He heaved Camus aloft, defying the heavier, bulkier frame. Camus froze, disbelief ripping through him as a goblin hoisted him off his feet. Elvin slammed Camus' body into the ground with bone-shattering force. He was hurled around, blood spilling from his mouth. He snapped the sword with his bare hands. The duel was over. Pride surged through the goblins for their leader, Elvin, and they sprinted over to make sure they were okay. Elvin barked that the orc's skull was iron. Camus would be all right. Camus snapped awake and owned up to his defeat. He shouted to Elvin, "Finish it now." Elvin cut him off, eyes blazing. "From now on, Camus' life is mine. I won't let you throw it away just like that." That revelation hit Camus like a lightning strike, leaving him reeling. Elvin shoved forward and roared his victory to everyone, bragging he'd crushed the Corvus tribe, and the goblins erupted in wild cheers. He stormed over, swallowed his pride, and apologized to Hiel for lunging in and putting on a show like that. Relief surged through Hiel. Knowing Elvin's ways calmed the storm in him, so he thanked him. Hiel tossed Camus a lifeline. "Stay on the island for a while, we'll get your ship repaired." He handed him the power to summon his entire tribe. Camus nodded, vowing he'd see it through and steer clear of any trouble. Elvin spotted Fula barreling at him, and she snapped a kick into him before he could even react. Agony ripped from him in a raw scream, and he snapped, "What are you doing?" She closed the distance and buried her head against him. Worry cracked her voice as she grabbed Elvin and snapped that she'd already told him not to overdo himself like that again. As the dust settled, Camus strode forward, claimed the orcs as his charge for now, and beckoned the other orcs to come greet him. Over 100 Corvus tribe members flooded in as his guests, and the day's relentless intensity drained him, worry clawing at his gut, leaving him utterly exhausted. Ash and Haney vowed to carry out the Queen's orders, and now stand sworn to serve Riel's foster parents. When the Belden tribe snagged his title, the others surged forward, desperate to be named by him too. He relented, then snapped that he only lent tame, so others could tap his crest's power. Naming someone didn't make them his subordinate. He slapped a new name on Ash, Ashton, and Hina ascended to Highness, and he urged them to guard their comrades from now on. He braced for the onslaught. Things were about to get hectic, and Varys promised he'd carve out new living quarters for the others. Out of nowhere, a searing headache exploded behind his eyes, the leftover exhaustion from earlier. Turns out he was burning up with a fever. Diana vowed she'd escort him to his room, and Varys nodded, taking charge of the rest. Hiel waved it off like it meant nothing, and she snapped that he had to have been utterly exhausted. She ignored his protests and hoisted him into his lab. Humiliation slammed into him, scorching his cheeks bright red. Camus and Hines cringed at the awkwardness as she, utterly dense, marched straight for Hiel's room, completely missing what they meant. Hiel conceded she'd been half right about him needing rest, and shoved every other responsibility onto Varys, so she could focus on nursing him back to health. Varys sized up the Leviathan's gargantuan corpse and began plotting how to dispose of it. Then Mappa charged in and devoured a chunk of it. Mappa erupted into a wild, joyful dance, every stomp and spin screaming that the meat was unbelievably delicious. Varys slammed his palm down and bellowed, summoning golems 10 and 11. They were asked to turn the cave beneath the reclaimed land into a freezer, and shockingly, the Leviathan wound up on their plates. He knew he'd also have to wrench the sea-battered golems from the surf. The orcs thundered up to Varys and begged to be let in, boasting battle-scarred boats and crews who owned the sea. Varys nodded, thrusting heavy coils of rope into their hands so they could bind the golems. Hiel burned with a desperate hope to make orcs and goblins get along despite their bloody past, even if it took years. The orichalcum shield had cradled the golems' heart stones intact, so he grinned and vowed to rebuild them and press them straight back into service. Before any of it, Hiel knew he had to move, and Rihanna stood at his side, cooking a meal to fuel him. He took charge of his care and tackled every other thing he might need help with. She snapped that he had to eat better, rolled up her sleeves, and spoon-fed him by hand. He relished being fed like this, and thanks to her, he began to feel alive again. Varys's medicine, brewed from Yggdrasil, kicked in. He felt a healing surge, and his recovery roared into overdrive. He waved Rihanna off, brushed aside her worry, and insisted she not trouble herself. He'd recover soon. Rihanna waved away his worry, declaring it wouldn't be a problem for him and grinning that a rest like this now, and then felt glorious. She relished tending to him, and he cherished the worried, tender kindness she poured over him. He snatched a single breath of rest and dove right back in while the others kept working. He couldn't wait to rush back into the mines. Meanwhile, deep beneath the caves, goblin miners slammed their picks down as the air around them suddenly grew noticeably warmer than the rest of the tunnels. They kept digging deeper when out of nowhere tragedy slammed into them, and they saw. His jaw dropped as water gushed from the very hole he'd just dug. They braced for disaster, steam billowed up, and the supposed tragedy revealed itself as a hot spring, a true blessing. The next day, Hiel's memory exploded with the tale. He'd battled towering waves to an island clinging to an abandoned reef, hauled a wrecked ship from the rocks to safety, and brought down a legendary beast. Next, even after he'd already battled through his fair share of hardships, he plunged into the greatest trial he'd ever faced. He wound up in the same hot spring as Rihanna. She melted into the warmth while he squirmed, painfully awkward in the steam. It all kicked off a week ago. The day they uncovered the hot spring, still nursing his wounds, he wrenched himself upright and lunged for his pickaxe, but pain lanced through his body, so fierce he couldn't even swing. Then Rihanna burst in and found him howling in agony. His ill-timed movement had sparked the pain. She implored him once more to take it easy, and he apologized to him again. Camus taunted him, branding him a sinful man just to fray his girl's nerves, and he froze in shock when he saw others had shown up too. Camus shrugged and declared he was only passing through. Rihanna was showing him around the island. Rihanna shoved Hiel's tattered clothes, ripped in the last fight into his arms, and she stitched them with spider silk, reforging them into something tougher than ever, and he roared his thanks to Rihanna. Ashton blurted, "I just realized this island still bristles with surprises." From his point of view, it first looked like a small reef, but it hid vast underground tunnels, bristling with masterful smithing gear, and even Camus, who had roamed countless lands, had never seen a Yggdrasil before. Hiel's grin lit up the shore as he vowed to keep turning the island into a better place to live, and told them to speak up the moment anything caught their eye. Camus nodded in agreement. They vowed to Hiel they'd stop at nothing, to be accepted as fellow islanders soon. Hesitation gnawed at the goblins as they fumbled over how to command the orcs, and Camus knew these things take time. Hiel vowed it would be fine. Since they already meshed with humans like him, they'd learn to understand them before long. Camus beamed at his kindness. They pressed Hiel, demanding to know how he'd forged that dominion simply by treating monsters with kindness. Hiel shot back that it was a long story, then confessed he was originally from Sandfels. The Shiel Reef was part of his homeland. The name Sandfels slammed into Camus, snapping his attention. Moments later, Fuller burst in, breathless, warning him they'd hit trouble. He snapped, "What is it?" and she answered, laying it out plainly. He blurted to him that a sudden burst of scalding water had shot up from underground. He surged there with the rest of them, determined to see it with his own eyes. Varys leaned in and asked how he was feeling, and he shot back that he could walk around just fine before gushing that finding a hot spring was an incredible discovery for them. Elvin whooped, thrilled to finally have the hot spring he'd always adored. Fuller kept his cool and fired at him. "What will we do if the hot spring floods the cave?" The goblin miners spat out exactly how it happened. The water kept gushing in, relentless. He turned to Fulla, desperate for a way out. She faltered. Her hometown had never faced the likes of this. Hiel's mind snapped into focus. First order of business, test whether this hot spring water was safe. Out of nowhere, MAPPA burst onto the scene, dove into the hot spring, and basked in the steam all to themselves. Elvin boiled with rage. He'd wanted to go first, and Varys reassured Hel the water looked fine since Mappa had no problems. He even offered to inspect it later, and Hel was grateful for their help. He barreled over to Mappa and begged him for any way to haul the water outside. Varys barked it would be brutal. People usually tap the mountain's runoff from peak to base. But this hot spring sat buried deep inside the cave. Then, while Mappa relaxed, a lightning bolt of an idea struck. He bolted straight for the blacksmith's forge. He sketched bold new designs and showed them to Hiel. Hiel instantly grasped the plan, turned the workshop into a stone mold foundry, and smelt the iron ore into supplies. They plunged straight into the work, and Hiel slammed open his inventory, hauling out the ores. Camus' jaw dropped as he saw how he did it. Workers swarmed the molds and churned out iron pipes by the dozen. Next, MAPA re-engineered golems 8 and 9. A razor of fire magic screamed from their arms, slicing the air in a searing line. It lets you fuse pipes, melting their edges together into one seamless, sealed joint. That kicked off a massive operation to haul scalding water from the depths up to the surface. Mappa whipped up wild new contraptions that blasted torrents of water out of the cave. He refused to let the water go to waste, so he rallied Camus and the others to keep building and tending a massive public bath on the surface. He was itching to chip in a little on the project, too. Rihanna shut him down, forcing him to step back and watch everyone else shoulder the work. A week of non-stop work finished the build. Now one mission remained: haul the scalding hot water up to the surface. He beamed at the massive bathhouse, while Camus eyed the tangled pipes and couldn't believe water would ever rise. He'd never seen machines like these run before. After that, MAPPA hammered the machines into their final form, and deep underground, the buried device screamed to life, powered by Golem number 10's furious wind magic. MAPA hit the switch, and the machine roared awake, its mechanism creaking as it slowly began to turn. Everyone surged forward, desperate to watch water gush from the statue linked with. Tangled among the pipes and machines, it lay lifeless. At first, nothing stirred. Mappa slammed his palm down, and the machine roared to life as scalding water blasted from the statue's mouth. Hiel grinned at how everything was turning out while Fulla and Elvin barreled for the hot spring, bursting with excitement. You stepped forward, beaming, and graciously offered Elvin the honor of being the first into the bath. They could take their time, but he was abruptly cut off before he could finish his sentence. Elvin's kick rocketed him straight into the bath. Camus flinched when a sudden fall cracked the quiet, but Elvin shrugged him off and barked at the others to get ready for the bath. He begged them to wash up first instead of diving in like a rampaging orc. The ugly truth was he got kicked. Side by side, goblins and orcs piled into the steaming spring, relief flooding them as the hot water loosened every aching muscle. A tidal wave of relief crashed through them, sweeping every last shred of exhaustion away. Elvin sneered at Camus, taunting him as weak for getting tired from such light work. "No way," you exploded the moment someone gushed about his beautiful body. Then another orc blurted to Elvin that he'd told Camus about his body. He began flaunting his gorgeous body with brash pride. While Astan and Hinas tended Riel, they discovered Riel had been a princess all along, not a prince, this time. Hiel burst in, grinning wide, as he saw everyone having the time of their lives. He jerked to attention as Elvin snapped at Fulla, "Don't swim in the hot springs." That jolted Hiel, snapping his attention to another crucial matter. He'd completely bungled the baths, forgot to separate men and women, and suddenly everyone was shoved into the same steaming pools. Realization slammed into him. Nobody even blinked. Men and women soaked side by side in the steaming bath, treating it like the most ordinary thing. He staggered back at the sight of the women stripped bare and snapped at Varys, demanding to know why he hadn't kept them apart. He snapped to attention. Someone else was going to be here. It was Rihanna, luxuriating in the bath and gliding through the steam. She slid up to him and offered to wash his back. Right then, his mind exploded into a whirlwind of racing thoughts. It shoved him into a brutal choice: seize it and weaponize it for his gain, or walk away. Or to throw up your hands and accept their ways. Shyness clenched his throat. He couldn't just let things be. He bolted, mumbled an excuse that he felt dizzy, and she froze, baffled by his sudden change. He plunged into the cave with a shell glued to his heels, turning his back on the communal bath everyone else was heading for. He blurted to Shell that he wanted to go with the others, but he'd feel like he was duping them. Maybe they wouldn't notice, but he couldn't pretend he didn't. He chased the rising steam until he stood at the hot spring's very source, and stumbled onto fresh, steaming water there. He sank into the steaming bath, letting the heat uncoil his muscles as the water washed the day's stress and bone-deep exhaustion away. He gawked at the whirring machines, convinced Mappa was nothing short of a genius. Rihanna stormed in and caught him bathing alone. He demanded why she was here. She shot back, "I can't leave you alone." She figured Hiel wanted to steal a silent bath, tucked away from every clamor. She grabbed his sleeve, eyes wide with hope, and blurted, "Can I come with you too?" That's how he plunged headfirst into the trap, In his eyes, one of the deadliest dangers he'd ever face. Panic hammered him, his dignity and pride teetering on the edge, while Rihanna stayed calm and asked him to look at the gleaming rock before them, shining like a tiny star. He forced down his panic and dove into his inventory, scanning every item to pull himself back to center. Rihanna said she had something important to tell him, and instantly a wildfire of panic ignited inside him. He hovered, pulse racing, desperate to know what she wanted to say when they were alone. She cut him off and spat out that she couldn't untangle the Belden tribe's feelings about the orcs. Her gut clenched with pity. She knew Kama wasn't to blame, but the goblins trembled. Their homes lay in ruins, and a fear stayed tucked in the corner of their hearts. Relief warmed her. The Belden and Corvus tribes labored shoulder to shoulder, shared meals, and soaked together in the hot springs. He confessed they were together, and it sent her heart soaring. He snapped, "You shouldn't apologize for that." He'd lived that pain. He knew how savage the battle was to tear yourself away from your past. He yanked her toward their island to show her goblins, slimes, cave spiders, golems, kobolds, a naked old man, and even a human. And to her astonishment, every one of them was getting along. Relief crashed over her. She leaned against his back and slipped into sleep before she even noticed. It blindsided him, panic exploding in his chest as every instinct screamed, "Run." He remembered Rihanna after the Leviathan fight, bone-tired like him that day. She forced herself to nurse him back to health and then never stopped helping anyone who needed her. Gratitude surged through him. He thanked her from the bottom of his heart, then planted himself at her side like a silent guardian, determined not to wake her. She bolted awake and blurted a hasty apology for dozing off like that. He'd stayed so long that dizziness slammed into him and blood hammered at his skull. The hot spring's heat poured fierce relief through him. Relief crashed over him as he realized he was finally himself again, fully recovered. Thrilled to be able to mine again, he choked up while Fula and Rihanna beamed, happy for him. Camus bounded up to him, beaming, to congratulate him on making a complete recovery, and he asked him, "Got a moment to talk with me?" They burst into the wide, open clearing, lungs flooding with crisp, clean air. Camus thrust a surprise gift into Hiel Skrull's hands, proclaiming it a celebration of his recovery. Hiel flipped it open, and a razor-sharp diagram of the harbor stared up at him. He snapped, "Did you make it?" And he admitted Varys had commissioned him. They'd planned to use the reclaimed land as the harbor's base. Camus blurted he'd heard Hiel dreamed of trading with the outside world someday, but starved for lumber. Hiel was forced to dismantle Belden's ships. Camus greenlit him to use the Corvus ship. After hammering shut the Leviathan's torn underbelly, they still had to secure a proper harbor and dock. He dove headfirst into the designs and turned them up a notch into something subtly spectacular. Hiel realized it could eclipse the kingdom's facilities. Camus' eyes snapped to Hiel. He was from Sanfels. Hiel claimed the title of Sanfels' 17th prince, but after failing spectacularly, he was banished from the country. And ever since he finally spilled his past to Rihanna, he's grown steadily bolder about telling it. Pity slammed into you about it, then Hiel declared he'd made the island his home, that humans never set foot there, and vowed to transform it into something better. He marched straight to Varys and Mappa, blueprints clenched in his hand, to nail down the construction plans, but Camus hovered over the plans, doubt gnawing at him. He still hadn't approved his own scheme. But after watching Hiel's ruthless construction methods, and seeing him erect walls at blinding speed, and they surged, swallowing the land inside them. Shock slammed into him when Elvin revealed his boss could do a lot. It carved the truth into stone. The king of Cave Crest was utterly awe-inspiring. He was convinced this was how they'd build a perfect harbor. He then snapped that he could only lay the foundation, and ordered him to ask Camus to supervise the construction. Varys nodded and entrusted the task to Camus. She was the only one fit for it. Camus leapt at the chance, grinning wildly as they set about forging an awe-inspiring harbor. He then conjured several hulking golems to back him up. Leviathan had torn golems 1 through 7 to pieces. Now they'd been reforged and bristled, ready to be thrown back into service. With the working parts locked in place, only one thing stood between us and the harbor. We had to rip stone from the earth and haul it into place. He plunged back into the mines after years away. He roared with joy at being able to mine again. Fuller congratulated him, but she noticed he wasn't wielding the mithril Isaacs. He assured her he still had it, but wanted a smaller, easier-to-wield Isaacs for now. Their ears snapped as Astan and Hina's urged Riel to fall back into a safe area. Riel erupted into mischief, desperate to roam wherever she pleased. He'll ask them to take care of Riel for a while. Fula snapped that if Riel couldn't help them, Highness would have to step up and do the work himself. Hinas agreed on the spot and tore off for the mine. Fula jabbed, taunting whether he was only deadly with weapons or could swing an ice axe too, and he'll try to tell Fula to stop teasing him so much. Aston brushed his worry away with a grin, insisted it was fine, and declared they should be thanking. She praised her for welcoming the newcomers without reserve, even though they'd only just joined, then showed Hinas exactly how to mine. Hein surged ahead, his strength undeniable as he mastered mining so fast he drove himself to the... At that moment, he dove headfirst into a fierce rivalry with Fula. Hiel grinned wide as their miner ranks swelled, adrenaline surging through him. Ashton steeled himself and plunged back into work, too. Then Riel unleashed his clairvoyance, eyes flashing, and jabbed a finger at one exact spot. Highness and Fula were whooping with glee as they mined ores by the dozen, but then... Ashton roared to Hiel, heartbeat hammering. He'd found something horribly wrong. Hinas and Fula gaped as Ashton shot ahead, fueled by Riel's help. They converged on the spot and uncovered a mysterious box that gleamed like orichalcum. Full guessed its size meant it was a coffin, but Ashton scoffed, unconvinced by her reasoning. Then he spotted another stone, snatched it up, and sprinted to his ore guide to get it checked. The new stone wasn't ordinary. It was a transport stone that snapped you instantly from one transport stone to another, and how far it could fling you depended entirely on its size. It hit him, if an identical stone existed somewhere else, they'd be able to shift straight to it. Fuller then jabbed at a hollow that perfectly matched the stone he held in his hand right now, as if it had been waiting for it. He'll slam it into the opening, and it will click home with a perfect fit. Out of nowhere, the hollow box flared to life, leaving everyone gaping. It was the teleporter, fueled by the stone's energy, and it just roared to life. Fuller's heart hammered as they stared at it. Could they go anywhere from it? Ashton clenched his jaw, dread knotting in his gut at the thought of where this would take them. They locked horns over whether to send a golem or something else, refusing to hurl it into the fight on a whim. Mappa lunged straight at the device and vanished in a flash of teleportation. Panic snapped through the room when they realized Mappa had vanished from the device. Their jaws dropped as he declared he'd go after Mappa and told everyone to wait. Ashton lunged in, stopped him, and vowed he'd go himself. Then Riel unleashed his clairvoyance and shoved Mappa's hiding place into everyone's sight. The moment they saw it, excitement ignited and they bolted toward it at full speed. Convinced it was safe now, Hiel sprang up and declared he'd go there, telling Shell to summon Varys here too. Riel lunged into the teleporter and vanished in a heartbeat, Fola tearing after him. Ashton and Heine squeezed in, cramming the device so tight there wasn't an inch to spare. Hiel said they didn't have to go all at once, but not a single person dared get out, and they were all trapped there. Then a teleportation surge ripped them all away at once. A heartbeat later, the teleporter hurled them out, sending them crashing onto the far end of the teleportation device. They burst into a cathedral of books, so massive it devoured the horizon. Hundreds of thousands of volumes piled in every direction as far as their eyes could see. They gaped, eyes refusing to accept it. Could this place really exist, or were they still trapped in Sheol? He insisted they were still on the island. The chamber matched the others he'd found, strewn with changed stones and guarded by those same hulking golems. The place loomed vast and bone-chilling, utterly deserted, only they remained. Highness barked to Hiel that Mappa seemed to be pulling ahead. Someone urged them to leave at once. He nodded and beckoned him to take the lead, but he tailed Haines for some time, silent and relentless. They reached the spot and froze. Mappa lay crumpled on the ground, blood pooling around him. He rockets to Mappa, heart hammering, fearing something might have just attacked him. He knew the reason was absurd the moment. The Mapper's nose started gushing blood at the sight of it. A book bursting at the seams, with hundreds of scandalous, wildly inappropriate pictures. Mappa sprang to his feet, eyes snapping to a book which fiercely guarded the secret of the cave king's crest. He'll shout for Mappa to hurry, and since Mappa couldn't read a single word, he scoffed at the book, hurled it aside, and darted after the others. He tore back to where they'd come from, and found Shell had already brought everyone else along. He spun to Varys and barked, "Spotted any good books around here?" Varys stared at the language etched inside them, couldn't decipher a single mark, and his healing hands were useless. Camus' excitement exploded. Everything around them suddenly screamed adventure. He couldn't shake the certainty. After spotting a humming teleportation device, a colossal library, and the slumbering ruins of an unknown civilization scattered across Zeoil Island, a treasure had to be hidden there. He urged them to explore deeper around the island, and they all agreed. But chunks of the terrain were still crumbling, so he warned everyone to watch their step and never confront the golems head-on. They plunged into the library, racing down aisles and rifling through books for clues. After a while, Fulla beckoned him over and declared she'd found a book brimming with pictures. When he locked eyes with them, their jaws dropped at an insanely detailed drawing of a vast, sprawling town. Hiel squinted, hunting for the town's name as déjà vu slammed into him. He'd seen buildings like those before. Rihanna jabbed a finger at the photo and shouted that the mountain was the shield's spitting image. Its size was nothing like Shiel's, and it outshone Shiel's current beauty. Then he'll spot Shell, eyes locked on something, unblinking and razor-focused. He chased Shell's sight and uncovered a towering statue of a woman. Rihanna gasped, breath caught. The statue was breathtaking, like a goddess carved from marble. Hiel's breath hitched. He suspected this statue might be the very idol Shiel's ancient inhabitants had once worshipped. Shock slammed into him. No kingdom records matched ruins like these, and his mind burned with one question. What other ruins lay hidden in Sheol? They plunged deeper into the library, regrouped and reported their finds, then ripped heartstones and magic stones from the golems' shattered remains, the place still wrapped in mystery. Varys vowed to sink into the dusty tomes and pry their secrets loose, and while they talked, a chill tore through them as the echo from the wall behind them returned twisted and wrong. She stepped up and tapped the wall. The hollow thunk proved she was right. She screamed, "Hiel," and snapped that a hidden opening yawned behind the wall. They tore through the site, scouring every wall and shadow. No doorway, no hatch, no way in. Fuller blurted, "Should I just try digging it?" He zeroed in on the perfect spot to dig and signaled Fulla over. Fulla brought the ice axe down on the mark with careful, precise strikes. Her instincts were right. She darted forward and yanked it open to see what lay inside. He'll sprint after her to check it out too. Then he whooped, slapped Fuller on the shoulder, and praised him for pulling off that secret play. The place harbored the change stones, and luck hit hard. 3 of them materialized at once. Fuller flashed back to mornings when she catapulted out of bed before anyone else, always beating the world awake. She bolted straight for the cave, pickaxe in hand, and plunged into mining. Along with golem number 15, her hunger for mining burned hotter than anyone else's. She staggered out last, the final soul to leave the tunnels. Unease gnawed at Hiel whenever he watched her become utterly consumed by mining. There was no holding her back. Something inside her screamed for it, and she'd grab it no matter the cost. When they pinpointed which one was the change stone, they shot back to the surface and swarmed together, arguing and piecing it apart for a while. None of them had ever heard of a change stone before. Rihanna slammed the truth at them. She'd evolved here through that stone. Their jaws dropped when they realized Rihanna had once been a run-of-the-mill goblin. Camus' jaw dropped. He'd never known Rihanna was the Bell-Down princess. Camus blurted he'd been convinced the whole time that Rihanna was an elven princess who'd eloped with Hiel because her ears looked elfin, and Hiel and Rihanna yelped, spilling their drinks. He blasted out his words, throwing them into deeper confusion as he sneered that it was odd they were still reacting like that. He snapped back into talking about the changing stones. He never expected them to unearth 3 all at once. They carved one out for Fulla. She'd found them and hunted them for years. He jabbed a finger at Varys and said, "You could use one too." Doubt gnawed at Varys. He suspected someone else could wield it far better. Hiel insisted he'd already thought it through. Letting the Sorcerer King crest gather dust would be a bloody waste. Camus' jaw dropped. The Sorcerer King had once borne the supreme sorcery-type crest, and Aston froze in the same stunned disbelief. If Varys could actually wield it, it would blow them away. Elvin dropped the bomb on Varys. He was in the last years of his life too, and a new body would buy him years of true health. Fulla and Rihanna swore, fire in their eyes, that no harm would ever touch Varys. Varys declared he'd also been itching to use his crest. He agreed with a sharp nod, locked onto Hiel, and asked for permission to wield a single change stone. Decision sealed. 1 change stone remained, and nobody stepped up to evolve. Ashton and Hina stood their ground, unshaken, their crests primed and ready to be used. Varys locked onto Camus and fired the question, "Do you have a crest too?" Camus proclaimed he bore a crest. The chamber spit out the sea dragon crest, a relic that commands the ocean itself. But it bonds only with aquatic monsters, so Camus couldn't use his crest at all. Camus flat-out refused to evolve just to use it. Elvin insisted the crest would make him far more powerful and be a sailor's perfect advantage. Camus scoffed that it meant nothing since he didn't. He sneered at the thought of swapping his gorgeous body for the aquatic monster's slimy scales. He refused outright, and not even they could force him. A plan snapped into place, save the chainstone for later. They snatched up the change stones and moved at once. Fully stepped up to go first and spun to Rihanna, asking what she was supposed to do. She told her to picture who she wanted to become, and blaze that wish into the changed stone. She shut her eyes and conjured the person she wanted to become, every detail blazing in her mind. She was haunted by her weakness, always the one someone else had to protect. She'd been stuck trailing them and feeling left behind, but that ended today. She would finally evolve. She smashed through every limit and rose into the warrior her name demanded, the daughter of the great warrior Elven. The others gaped, jaws dropping as they watched an evolution for the first time. He restored Mappa's closed eyes in a heartbeat, then spun on Rihanna and demanded she step up and do her part. Fulla surged into evolution, and she felt her gaze lift, her line of sight now higher than before. Now she held her breath, wondering if it had worked, and Rihanna burst into motion. She lunged to shield her body. Rihanna then appeared full of. When she evolved, the shell morphed into a mirror, and the face staring back showed just how utterly she'd changed. Fulla erupted in joy. She'd finally evolved exactly how she'd always wanted, and Rihanna congratulated her. Elven beamed at how much his daughter had grown and fired. Stronger now? Fulla replied that she was stronger, specifically in magic. Then a burning question seized her. How could she test whether she could wield magic? Hiel stepped up to check her and declared he could see magic streaming from her. She could start learning to wield it now. Fulla gaped in disbelief. She'd evolved, yet her skin stayed exactly the same. Rihanna suddenly looked like a human, her cheeks flaming as she remembered she'd wished to be attractive so she could heal. She warned them it would hit each person differently. Varys dared to imagine he'd become something else, snatched the chainstone and triggered the evolution, but everyone's jaws hit the floor. Vera hadn't changed a bit. Camus' mind raced. Why hadn't Varys changed? Varys' instinct screamed. Something was different than before. Shock hit him like a gut punch. He fumbled and his staff clattered to the ground. A fierce surge of relief hit Varys the moment he realized the years-long ache in his back had finally been healed. Hiel cheered for him, genuinely happy, but his eyes kept snapping to the crest. Suspicion simmered beneath his smile. Then after taking a look, his eyes snagged on it. A tidal wave of arcane energy exploded from the Sorcery King crest. Varys' eyes flashed. He couldn't wait to test the crest. A surge of power slammed through him. As Sorcery King, he might be able to command any spell. He kicked off the test by hurling a searing bolt of fire magic. A roaring inferno devoured a vast expanse. No one guessed such a basic spell could unleash that much raw power. It was incredible. Then their jaws dropped as Varys' body snapped into a younger, stronger form. Varys hailed the Sorcery King as astonishing, but confessed he still couldn't adjust the raging magic energy. Every head whipped around, and mouths dropped open, as the colossal change exploded into view. Elven's voice cracked with disbelief as he stared at Varys and asked, "Is it really you?" Varys admitted, voice trembling, that emotion crashed over him. He'd never imagined he'd ever wield magic, and it left him feeling like an entirely different person. Hiel blasted him with praise. His magic was incredible, then dropped the bomb. His appearance had been changed as well. Varys had no idea what he'd meant, until he stared into the mirror and his reflection slammed the truth into him. They locked eyes with their reflection and staggered back, shock ripping through them. Moments later, he snapped back into his old self and crumpled, plunging into unconsciousness. After that, when he came to, Hiel grabbed Varys and blurted he'd heard the Sorcerer King crest could reshape its owner into the form that channels magic energy with brutal efficiency. All he had was that scrap of knowledge. Back in the kingdom, no one would show him their true abilities, and Varys' eyes flashed with relieved satisfaction. He practically vibrated with excitement, eager to dive back in and dissect every detail. Hiel's grin said it all, thrilled to help. He was certain Varys' tireless diligence would let him master the Sorcery King on his own. Fulla burst in, locked eyes with him, and demanded, "So, does my new outfit look great?" He whooped that her new outfit looked insanely cool, and she beamed, saying the princess had worked herself ragged to craft it just for her. Then she plunged back into the mine and drove her pick into the rock. And Hiel told her she could wield the magic crystals whenever she found them. He found them, grinned, and figured it would be fine. Lately, they'd been unearthing far fewer magic crystals. Rihanna and I had already been forged into brutal strength. Varys' magic crackled with its own terrifying power. A spark of inspiration struck, an idea to teach her how magic energy twists and reshapes in. She sculpts raging fire and howling wind with glowing magic circles. She must learn the secret letters that write those spells. A bunch of them were smacked by a tiny wave of overwhelm, but excitement surged through her as she pushed onward. She poured every waking hour into ruthless, non-stop magic training. Her intuition was razor-sharp. She seized details in a heartbeat. She exploded into motion, unleashing a rapid barrage of magic attacks. But she remained far beyond the reach of their aim. A grin split his face the moment he could finally use them, and he erupted into ecstatic jumps. Elvin panicked when her shot slammed into Mappa, but he just chuckled and assured her it was pretty good for a first try. She attacked every task with relentless grit, and Hiel told Elvin she idolized her father's strength. Elvin said he'd have been ecstatic if that were true, but she told him she'd always drilled things over and over, determined not to be left behind by her friends. She told him how losing to Princess Nay ripped her apart, so she hurled herself into brutal, relentless training and clawed her way back. The game of stones sent her reeling, frustration erupting into tears. Hiel then realized it also meant that Fiula hunted evolution, desperate to match the princess who had evolved first. She loathed losing. Being beaten by a friend ripped through her pride. Hiel grinned, thrilled she finally had someone to go head-to-head with. A hot stab of jealousy ripped through him. He'd never had a friend like that before. Meanwhile, at harbor, crews hammered and cranes screamed as construction raced forward. As they wrestled the ship into port to begin repairs, they threw up a dock at the harbor first to rush ship repairs, and Camus demanded they return at once. Many Corvus families were hiding and waiting. Hiel waved him off, insisting he needn't worry about finishing the harbor and cutting loose the moment the ship's repairs were done, and Camus answered with a choked, grateful thank you. And pressed him. He wanted to start trading soon, so he had to figure out what he'd trade in the meantime. Other orcs leapt forward, urging Hiel to hand the sea trade to them and pledging a fat stockpile of goods. Hiel felt their impatience snap. They couldn't wait to set sail, excitement crackling through them. He practically burst with joy. Finally, he was about to start trading with the outside world. The orcs suggested he kick things off by hawking gems from the Sheol and push to harvest goods from Yggdrasil too, but Hiel cut them off with, "We'll discuss that later." Suddenly, a monstrous shadow surged up from beneath the waves right beside the docks. The orcs labored with brutal efficiency, and the ship's repairs were nearly finished. They resolved to finally return to their main job. The long stretch ashore had eaten at them, leaving them restless and desperate to sail again. The shadow in the waters crept up behind them, inching closer. It burst from the water, startling the orcs, a snake-like monstrosity whose sudden appearance sent them into a frenzied commotion. A brutal, jagged sound tore through the silence. I heard it. He snapped his head toward them, pulse spiking and dread blooming. What kind of monster was that? The snake-like monster whipped through the harbor, smashing everything in its path and sending wreckage tumbling. Orcs exploded into flight, sprinting away from it. At the last second, Camus burst in and drove a savage kick straight into the monster. He blasted it, sending it hurtling backwards. He stood his ground on the docks, guarding the harbor with fierce resolve, and a sharp sting of disappointment hit him as the orcs scrambled backward. Terror stamped on their faces while the monster loomed. He urged them to steel themselves and prepare to strike back. Terror clenched them. The monster wore Leviathan's face. Camus hadn't imagined this would strike them and barked for everyone to get a proper look. The monster was only a fraction of Leviathan's size. More of those snake-like monsters surged in and pounced on the terrified orcs. Mappa burst in at the last second and slammed the gleaming new sword into Camus' hands. His previous one had been smashed to pieces in the earlier duel. Camus seized his new sword and, sliding up from between, slashed the monster like it was nothing. The orichalcum sword's razor edge stole his breath, and he flooded Mappa with praise. Hiel barreled into the harbor and demanded, "What monster is that?" Camus hauled him back, warning it was too dangerous to come any closer. With its head hacked off, the monster's body snapped back upright. Camus shouted to everyone, "That's an evil moray." More of the snake-like monster erupted through the surface. A heartbeat later, the truth slammed through. The monster wasn't a swarm at all, but one colossal main body. Those snake-like limbs weren't separate creatures. They were its arms, and Camus roared they had to crush its main body, or else it would snap back to life in an instant. The monster regrew its arm and lunged again, sprouting even more writhing snake arms. Then Fula blasted it with a searing fire attack, and she sprinted to help them, but the sight of the snake on, the arm knitting itself back together, made her gag. She couldn't bear to watch. She bolted, sprinting away from it. Hiel hauled her to safer ground. She whirled to him, eyes blazing. "How do we deal with this monster?" Camus barked that they had to destroy the main body, but its massive arms blocked every angle. He'd normally blast it with cannon fire, and they refused to risk shelling the harbor. Varys slid into the monster's blind spot while the others baited it, stealing its focus. He then unleashed the sorcery King Crest, and he surged into his magic-wielding form. Varys channeled water magic, twisting it into whip-like ropes of water, too. He lashed every one of the monster's arms tight, and the moment a gap opened, he snapped a sharp signal for healing, then roared at Fula to unleash lightning magic alongside him. They surge together and slam a synchronized, crushing strike into the beast. It explodes into a spray of jagged fragments. They erupted into triumphant cheers. They'd neutralized the threat, and the harbor stood unscathed. A grin tore across Hiel's face as Varys and Fula blasted forward, leaving him breathless at how far they'd come in such a short time after revolving. They erupted in cheers at every inch she gained, but a different, darker worry gnawed at Elvin. Rumor had its shame swallowed the orcs because Camus never imagined the fear Leviathan inspired would gouge a cavern deep into their hearts. A cold slap of truth hit him. He'd blown it by failing to lock into the crew's mindset, and they couldn't set sail into the open ocean like this. He barreled in and tried to reason with them, but they were convinced Leviathan wasn't the only one. Another could be lurking nearby. Varys insisted it deserved one more round. Fula snorted that facing a legendary beast left them almost no chance. Elvin realized it would still be harder for the Corvus tribe to claw their way out of fear. Varys urged Camus to recruit a few Belden tribesmen for a quick trip to his people, but Camus flatly refused. The Beldens couldn't handle the patched ship. The Corvus were people of the sea. Strip away their ships and their pride would drown. Hiel and the others could see guilt eating him alive. Rihanna cut through the noise, urging them to heal if they could forge a ship so indestructible that even Leviathan couldn't break it, and the Corvus tribe would finally breathe easy. Hiel seized the idea, envisioning the ship's hull sheathed in heavy metal armor. Camus warned him it would be impossible to implement. A metal hull's raw weight would bog them down, turning every movement at sea into a slow, brutal struggle. Fuller barked that in that case they could use featherlight orichalcum, and Varys coldly shot it down as impossible for them. Orichalcum was near mythic in scarcity, and they couldn't summon enough to blanket the ship's colossal hull. Then Mappa burst in with a wild idea, raked a bold pattern into the ground, and fixed his gaze on it. There it was, the Leviathan, sketched in savage detail. And another creature, a dead ringer for Leviathan, loomed beside it. Varys' eyes narrowed. He seized Mappa's meaning in an instant. They charged toward the site where the Leviathan's corpse lay. He felt triumph slam through him again. Defeating a foe like this felt absolutely unreal. Leviathan's scales soaked up cannon volleys, snuffed out sorcery, and laughed as mundane blades glanced off without so much as a nick. He unsheathed his mithril Isaacs and unleashed the Cave King's roaring power. He tore gleaming plates from the Leviathan's flank, ripping its scales out like veins of living ore. The scales were feather-light, and he realized that's what let the massive beast dart and twist with uncanny agility despite its size. Later, he'd plunge in and process those scales. Mappa melted the mithril arrowheads they'd fired at the Leviathan and hammered the molten metal into sturdy tools. Mappa and Camus leaned in, scouring the plans for what needed reinforcement beyond the exterior, then plotted a full overhaul of the infrastructure. They swore to beef up the scales to the max, without shaving off an inch of sailing speed or rugged durability. They dove into construction, forging a ship on an orichalcum frame, carving the inner boards and a towering mast from Yggdrasil branches, and plating its hull with Leviathan scales. They zeroed in, determined to forge a ship for the Corvus tribe. They stood spellbound as the ship rose from its cradle, plank by plank hammered into place. Later that evening, Hiel snapped at Camus. Dinner was fast approaching, and he promised he'd be there in a heartbeat. Camus stared at the spot where their dead comrades had been buried by Hiel and the others with solemn respect, and gratitude surged through him, so fierce he could barely force the words of thanks. Camus unleashed a tale on Hiel about 100 years ago. One man rallied the homeless, war-shattered orcs, driven from everything by relentless wars with humans and rival tribes, and marched them to the sea. Camus, the Corvus tribe's hero orc, single-handedly forged a fleet so massive it could stand against an entire nation's army. The Corvus tribe enshrined that name as a blazing torch, handing it from leader to leader for generations. When his turn came, Camus seethed. Traitors had wormed into his tribe, and he couldn't rally his people to set sail again. Pity surged through him then. You vowed he'd become strong enough for others to lean on. He clenched his jaw, determination blazing in his eyes. He would not bring shame to the proud name Camus. The next day, with the ship finished, they yanked the watergate wide open. They unleashed the golems and hauled the newly built ship into the roaring open sea. It loomed tougher than any other ship. Leviathan's scales fused into its hull, turning it into a living, snarling beast. Fula and Ashton gaped at the ship in stunned awe, while Hiel's jaw clenched, his gaze snagged on a far darker worry. Rihanna zeroed in. It was because the Corvus people were visibly on edge. Kamu bellowed to his crew about the upcoming test training and urged everyone to get fired up. He caught it, some of them were still moving with an unsettling, dangerous edge. He zeroed in on him, slammed his eyes shut, certainty crackling through him about the scheme he'd cooked up with Hiel. She gave a sharp nod, and he sprang it into motion. Bill bet everything on Camus to take it from here, and he bellowed, "Golem number 16, come forth." Onlookers froze, jaws dropping as they scrambled to figure out what he was doing. Beneath the waves, a colossal shadow of something huge hung over the depths. A monstrous silhouette burst from the depths and broke the surface right in front of the Corvus tribe's new ship. The crew's lookouts screamed a warning. Something was up ahead. The crew froze, voices dropping to panicked whispers. "Is that a monster?" Golem number 16 burst forth, a writhing, snake-like monstrosity. That was the very terror that sent the Corvus tribe scattering. They mistook it for Leviathan, and then 16 unleashed a searing magic strike that slammed into them. Their ship shrugged off the magic attack like it was nothing, gliding on unscathed, while the crew was in commotion, being scared of 16, thinking it was a Leviathan. They told Camus they needed to get out of here quickly. Camus swooped in and soothed them in an instant. He barked that the ship hadn't even flinched under that attack, then ordered them to hold steady and size up their opponent. When they whip around and finally stare at it, taking it all in, they froze, eyes wide. This thing was hewn from solid rock. Back on land, the others gaped as a colossal golem, molded into a Leviathan, slammed toward them. Everyone scrambled, desperate to know why it looked like that and why it was attacking. He implored them to stay out and not interfere in any way. Camus thundered to his crew, launching a mock battle to rehearse taking down the Leviathan. The crew froze, convinced they couldn't fell something that massive. Camus bellowed that they once wore the pride of invincible sea warriors, but after facing Leviathan and watching their strikes fail to even nick it, he felt their fear tighten his chest too. He clenched the changed stone, stared them down, and refused to back down. He'd challenge the sea again. Gasps ripple as they spot the stone clenched in his hands. Camus launched himself into the water, bidding a fierce farewell to his once perfect body, and locking eyes with them as he ordered them to watch him closely. As he ripped the curtain aside to unveil the new Camus, he stood as the leader of the Corvus tribe. He plunged straight into the water, and the stone heard his wish and flared to life. Onlookers gaped, breaths caught, eyes burning to know how it would all unfold. You burst from the sea, surf spraying as you crashed onto the shore. He erupted into Aquaman, reborn as the ocean's champion, and now he could unleash the sea dragon's crest. He braced himself to take on Golem number 16, then blasted through the water like a torpedo straight at it. 16 blasted it with a storm of searing rays, but Camus darted through their attacks, shaping water with his aquatic powers and slipping past them effortlessly. He blazed across the water, skimming the surface like he was flying. Even Camus himself stared, jaw slack, as the sea dragon carved the water around him into obedient, writhing currents. Determination ignited, he barreled straight at 16. He closed in, but the stone's armor loomed impenetrable, its defenses massive and unyielding. He danced through 16th's attacks, eyes locked on a single opening to unleash a crushing blow. The other orcs gaped as their boss hurled himself into the fight alone. Itself bristled, Rihanna and Hiel froze, minds racing with dread. Even an evolved Camus could crumble beneath the golem's might. But then Camus slammed his bare hands into the attack and stopped it dead. A brutal shove slammed him into the water, and the golem barreled straight at him. Then the other orcs of the crew barreled their ship toward you, closing the distance and bearing down on you. They slammed the armory's guns onto the golem and ripped into it with a barrage. They weren't about to let their boss fight alone. They blasted the golem with cannon salvos and a rain of arrowheads, driving it back and carving an opening for Camus. Relief surged through Camus as he watched their spirits soar again. He plunged beneath the surface, vanishing into the depths to unleash his next move. And unleash his crest sea dragon's tidal fury, too. A roaring tornado exploded to life, coiling around golem number 16. It gulped the massive object whole, swallowing it entirely despite its monstrous bulk. The moment 16 slipped inside the tornado, the golem could barely move as Camus prowled free. He was about to crush it. They clung to the hope that Hiel would fix it later. He ripped his sword free, cloaked the blade in a spiraling torrent of water, and spun it into a screaming drill. Camus twisted his sword into a savage trident drill. He plunged it into 16, igniting a titanic collision that ripped 16 apart. Everyone erupted in relief when Camus toppled the golem, even if it was only a mock battle. The orcs roared with pride when their captain sacrificed his aging body for their sake. When the dust finally settled, calm washed over the scene and everyone surged back to the harbor. Hiel flung his arms wide and welcomed Camus and the other orcs. He boasted to Camus that he'd been incredible out there. Camus roared that he only pulled it off because his crew had his back. He felt their doubt like a weight crushing the room, every glance razor-sharp, questioning both his strength and his crew's. He swallowed his pride, apologized to every soul on his crew, stared each of them down, and asked, "Will you still brave the seas with me?" The orcs always surged behind him, roaring he needn't ask, he was their boss. Elvin jabbed at Camus, grinning as he taunted him for being forced to give up the stunning body he'd been so proud of. Camus ripped off his shirt, bearing a brand-new, gleaming body. He found it handsome, too, convinced he'd just burst awake into a dazzling new stage of beauty. With the perfect ship and the perfect crew behind him, he was certain their voyage would triumph from this moment on. He'll snap yes and seal the deal. Camus plunged into a brutal week of non-stop testing and fine-tuning, wringing every flaw from the ship, while Hiel and Varys quietly mapped out exactly what they'd trade. The day before they set sail, the Corvus tribe threw a roaring farewell, devouring the feast as if it were their last night on land. When night fell and the world stilled, Hiel barreled over to the ship with Rihanna and Shell, burning to get a close-up look herself. She barreled in and asked him if he liked ships. He snapped that he didn't, but a fierce hunger for the outside, world their ships could reach, has always burned in him. Rihanna lobbed, "Want to travel by ship someday." He blinked and admitted he hadn't thought that far ahead. The dream stayed out of reach. Back in the kingdom, he drifted like a ghost, never finding a place to call his own. He'd finally carved out a place in Shield to live with all of them. It became his home, and Rihanna's heart soared. Riel's eyes snapped to a lone figure posted at the ship's lookout. Then Camus leapt down from it, knowing Riel's eyes would snag him. There was no way he could slip by unseen. He blurted an apology for sneaking aboard without telling him, and Camus just brushed it off, saying the ship was partly his too. They always threw open their doors for him, the only human who'd ever earned his approval. Camus dropped that he needed to talk, and his mind shot to life. What could it be, with Camus sounding dead serious? Camus' voice sliced the silence. It was about his homeland. The kingdom of Sandfalls bowed to his father's rule. He'll snap the question back at him. "What do you know about your homeland, the kingdom of Sand Falls?" Camus ripped the silence with a bombshell. Claude's faction that betrayed him had been hired by the royal family of Sandfalls. The news hit him like a thunderbolt, and disbelief hit him like a punch. The kingdom of Sandfalls despised that monster. "Come, apologize. You've been silent about it for far too long." When they chased Claude, they burst into the smoking ruins of the Leviathan's wreck and found a lone survivor among the debris, clinging to life by a thread. With his last ragged breath, he confessed that their mission, crush the savage monster tribes along the kingdom's borders. In return, they'd pocket vast riches and the ironclad backing of Berlian's most powerful nation. They'd planned to hire Camus, but Claude slammed the brakes. He refused, certain Camus would never accept it. Disbelief slammed into Hiel when he discovered his father had ordered it, and he demanded to know why. Camus then revealed to Hiel that the kingdom of Sandfalls itself, an age-old realm that surged outward under his father's rule until it became the continent's largest power. Recruiting the Corvus tribe was probably just another move to stretch their influence even farther. Another worry gnawed at him, so he pressed Hiel again. "Am I really expelled?" Hiel confirmed it, but Camus leaned in and demanded, "Was that really the case?" Because the Shield and the Cave King closed in right behind. A buried trove of untapped resources and a crest that can tear them from the earth at will. Too many pieces are lining up for this to be mere coincidence. The moment those words hit, they pounced, planting the seed that Hel's father might already have known the Cave King's power and the secret buried beneath the shield. It didn't add up. He had no reason to keep quiet about the crest's power, and if he really wanted to develop the island, he'd have brought a much bigger crew. You declared to him that the reason for that could be that. Whatever slumbered inside the shield, Hill's father buried it in silence. He refused to let the world ever know. Rihanna's eyes snapped to Camus' outstretched finger. He was pointing straight at the underground ruins. You kept talking, and he confessed suspicion had gnawed at him from the start. He was convinced Hiel was fronting, pretending to be clueless about the whole thing with him. After living here, it hit him like a lightning strike. He was different to his core. Trust blazing, he slammed his hand onto Hiel's shoulder, signaling him to keep it in his. He clung to the fantasy that he was still Sandfalls' prince, and that Zio remained a piece of his kingdom. A day could come when he'll be forced to stand against his own country to protect Sheol from them. Understanding hit him like a blow. He grasped what Camus was saying, and memory slammed into him. He'd forgotten he still had bonds with the Sandfalls and his father, even though they'd sent him away. The next day, Camus and his Corvus tribe tore out to sea, casting warm-hearted regards to everyone from the Shield. They surged out to reunite with the families who'd stayed hidden, and he resurrected number 16, dispatching it with Camus to escort them and keep them safe on their voyage. Then he rounded everyone up and relayed every word from his conversation with Camus, and choked out an apology to them, dropping the bomb that the royal family of Sandfellas had masterminded the attacks on the Belden and Tyrus tribes. Elvin snapped that he had no reason to apologize and wasn't to blame, and the others pushed to start discussing what to do next. Varys' mind churned. Any contacts back in his homeland would spell disaster. Elvin seethed with dangerous confidence, ready to hurl anyone who dared trouble the monsters here skyward. Varys spat a cold warning that that move would ignite a war. Dread slammed into Hiel. He dragged them into something monstrous. Elvin snapped, "Don't feel that way," because Shield had staked its claim as everyone's home. His eyes snapped open. He shoved aside timidity and shouted for everyone's help with what came next. His infectious cheer steadied everyone around him. Varys warned him they'd planted him here to strip the land of its riches, and merchants would likely be arriving soon to trade with him. They didn't suddenly understand each other. Monsters and humans struck a cold bargain, coexisting only because it served them both. It would drown his country in riches and vindicate Hiel's reign over Sheol in this territory. Yet Sandfels could still interfere with Sheol. Ashton snapped, "So you're saying we have to get strong enough to bargain with the kingdom?" Varys agreed. Fula and Rihanna each hatched simple plans and sprang into action to propel the island's development even farther. Ashton sketched every bargaining move, but the whole deal teetered on what the Sandfells truly wanted. A bolt of realization hit Hiel. This could be the very thing Camus and Rihanna had flagged earlier. The key to the truth could be buried deep within the civilization, lurking in the underground ruins of the Shield. Varys admitted they were still in the dark about the Sheol and clung to the hope he'd be the one to decipher the library's books. He sifted through every detail, welded the facts together, and struck on a single solution they could pull off. Their goal, to rally the most elite miners from within their ranks. They forged the Shield Ruins excavation team, Hiel and Fuller at the front, kobolds flanking them, slimes and cave spiders slipping into the ranks. Fuller jabbed at him, smirking that it was the same group as always, but he only wanted to ignite their drive by planting a fresh spark in their minds. Rihanna jammed portable rations into everyone's packs, slammed one into his hands, and warned him to be back by dinner. He'll thank her for the help. With everything set, he steeled himself to plunge into excavating the new ruins. He set out to unearth Shield's secret and drag into the open exactly what his father meant to claim as his own. Fuller pressed him for a plan to dig the ruins deeper, and he declared they'd first kick things off by combing the area around the already excavated ruins, hunting every crack for clues while you handle the soil like glass. Dig too hard and you'll crush history. They hunted the arcane pulse leaking from every hidden ruin, eyes glued to Riel for the slightest flicker of reaction. For a week they tunneled with surgical care, inching relentlessly deeper. They tore the place apart and found nothing new. He couldn't even unearth the ruined passageways that once threaded the rooms together. Ashton slammed the truth down. They'd used a teleportation device to blink straight into the library. They pieced together that the ruins probably used teleportation to hop between the other sites they'd already discovered. There were never any physical passages, and each ruin once held a teleportation device that was likely lost to time. Hiel's eyes snapped open. This could work, and he hunted down which reference they'd used to drive the dig onward. Ashton snapped, "Dinner's almost here, let's return and take it one step at a time." Rihanna would tear into them for showing up late, so Hiel agreed and called it a wrap for the day. He whipped his head around, heart plummeting, the reel was gone. Everyone fanned out, hunting for her, certain she'd slipped away on her own again. He'll hear frantic scratching tear through the quiet, and when he chases them. He sprinted to Riel's side, dread spiking the moment he saw blood soaking Riel's paw. Someone barked for her to calm down, but Riel refused to stop. Fula winced at the obvious pain and demanded, "What happened to Riel?" Hiel warned her. Riel stared down the patch ahead like she had to dig there, no matter what. "What?" Fula snapped, then plunged her hands into the earth and began digging. After she slammed her ice axe into the spot, it found its mark and bit deep into the ice. She stormed onward, Ashton at her side, Haina's clothes behind, and Hiel right there with them. We all gasped when the remains lay before us. Deep in the cave, brittle bird bones lay strewn across the floor, a silent grave of tiny wings. His gaze snapped to Riel, who jabbed a finger at a lone egg, what looked like the dead bird's egg. It was fossilized. He figured the corpse had lain buried so long it had hardened into stone. And he scrambled to explain that to Riel. Riel refused to leave the egg, gripping it like a lifeline and swearing he'd save it no matter what. Hiel and Ashton froze, hearts racing and minds blank as they scrambled for a way forward. Fearing it would break their hearts later, Rihanna leapt into action and made sure they could carry the egg with them. She snatched the egg and rigged a snug harness onto Riel's back, cinching it tight to lock the egg in place. From the back it radiated pure, real-life cuteness and Hiel. Hiel asked if it weighed her down, but she just beamed, thrilled to tote the egg around like a prized trophy. From that moment on, Riel never left the petrified egg's side, cradling it against him even as he drifted into sleep. Hiel teetered on the brink of hatching, each tremor fueled by Riel's fierce care, but doubt twisted his gut. He realized it might be impossible. While they slept, the eggs trembled and pulsed, like life itself stirring inside. The next day they dug again when Highness's shovel struck something strange. He spun to Hiel and declared it looked like nothing they'd ever seen. A wrong, otherworldly thrum rose from the very spot he was digging on, but he couldn't hear a single thing coming from it. Both tried to fool it and both failed. Highness boasted his hearing was unmatched, even among the Tyrus tribe. A cold certainty slammed into him that something was unnaturally wrong, but the words died before he could shape them. He fought to explain that up ahead lay a steady current, flat, unshifting with no fluctuations. Riel slept through it, so they couldn't confirm a thing. Hiel dropped to his knees and tore into the earth, convinced digging was the only move. They shot a reply to Hina's, ears straining as they clawed through the earth to keep on course, pushing onward until even Hiel could hear the waters rush. A grin cracked his face. He loved where the sound was coming from. And behind it, a hollow chamber yawned open. Just as he lunged to step forward, Taran whipped out a web and glued his heel to the ground. A jolt tore through him, then he realized Taran had been right. Taran was perched on higher ground stranded with no footing ahead. He spun to Taran and shouted a raw thank you for her help. They burst into view of a colossal structure ahead that looked like a tower or pillar, a relentless torrent of water cascading from its summit. It turned out to be entirely man-made, vindicating Hein's claim that it was unnatural, and they went on to unearth more ruins. He strained to imagine how far the pillar plunged. It swallowed the light so completely that even Ashton's optimized eyes couldn't find the bottom. Ashton leaned in, eyes wide, as water ripped from the pillar's surface. No pipes, no outlet, nothing attached to its back. He'll zero in on a pulsating blue stone, pumping the water out like a furious fountain. He jabbed a finger at the pillar and told Taran to wedge that stone into it. Taran unleashed her spider web again and he lunged and ripped a blue stone free from the pillar. He pressed the cage king crest against it and scoured every inch. He realized the spring stone conjured water straight from raw magical energy. He staggered as it produced water. He realized they could have a water source anywhere they carried it. Ashton hunched at the cavern's rim, mind razor-sharp as he hunted the impossible source of water in this underground world. He jabbed at the rushing current, declaring they'd reach the other ruins by riding the water's flow. Convinced he was right, he plunged down. Hina snapped to a second sound that sliced the silence, and this time, a scrape of digging echoed nearby. He heard it crystal clear and jabbed a finger at the wall where the noise came from. He peered into it and felt a jolt of arcane energy leap from the wall, sending a tingle down his spine. That meant whatever erupted from the wall thrummed with raw magic and snapped everyone to attention. The hidden origin of the mysterious digging crept closer, inching toward them. Hiel's skin prickled as the mysterious creation pulsed with raw, overwhelming magic. And then it finally burst free, digging its way straight through the wall. A hulking shadow swallowed the ground, and they froze, pulse racing as they strained to imagine what massive thing cast it. Hiel suspected it might be a legendary dragon, so Hina snapped to full alert. The mysterious creature erupted in a feral roar, hurling a savage shout straight at Hiel and the others. In a heartbeat, someone mistook them for the underground people. Shockingly, the mysterious creature's footing betrayed it, and it plummeted down the ridge. A desperate cry rips through the air, so he snaps at Taran to fire a spider web, latching a silk lifeline onto the creature to stop it from falling. Hiel, Ashton, and Highness heaved and strained to save it, but its crushing weight overwhelmed them. Keep this up and it could come crashing down, dragging them with it. He shot a hand up and urged, "Wait just a second." And he retreated, unleashing his crest to process the rocks. They forged the scaffolders into the wall, right beneath the mysterious creature. Meanwhile, Fulla and the others' hands slipped, sending them tumbling off the spider rope. Scaffolders below braced it like a living scaffold and kept the dragon whole, So Hiel barked for it to scramble up the rock stakes. Fula's eyes snapped open. They'd rescued the dragon without thinking, and a cold knot formed as she pictured it turning and swallowing them whole. Everyone trembled with confusion and raw nerves as the dragon clawed its way skyward. Dragon's voice ripped through the cavern as he demanded if Hiel and the others owned these underground ruins. They froze, stunned. The exact same thought about the dragon hit them all at once. They hauled him to the surface, and he tore into the delicious food, feasting like a man reborn after starving and hoarding his rations for ages. He froze when he learned the dragon's name, Royden. He wasn't human. He was an earth dragon shifting through countless forms. Harris's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe he was actually about to see the legendary dragon he'd heard about. Fula seemed to know the tale too, yet the real dragon didn't match the picture she'd always held. He storms forward and hurls the question at Roydan. Were the underground ruins yours? Roydan blurted that he wasn't from these parts. He'd come from the Elto continent, and the name landed like a bomb because nobody here had ever heard of it. Roydan warned them his land was a red-hot hellscape. Volcanoes erupted in fiery blasts. Rivers of molten magma ran everywhere, and territorial dragons clashed there nonstop. He shot the question, is the Elto continent close? And Roydan grinned, saying he'd tunneled under the ocean floor and barreled due east for about a month before surfacing here. Hiel's jaw dropped when he heard that he dug from the bottom of the ocean, and Roydan barreled on, admitting he'd been terrified of them at first. He'd never seen people like that, and thanked him for saving him earlier. Meanwhile, Hiel seethed over him, losing the digging scale, then Roydan. Keep planting the seed in their heads that he might be talking to them. He wasn't talking. He was blasting his thoughts straight into their minds with raw telepathy. He'll fire the question at him, can you read their hearts too? And get the gut punch answer, not exactly, just a chillingly similar power. Roydan slipped into the minds of anyone he wanted to talk with, snatching their thoughts and understanding them as if they were his own. When the word Hiel and others echoed, they weren't spoken aloud. Roydan's thoughts slammed into their heads, instantly translating into their own minds so they could talk without a shred of language trouble. Fuller crackled with excitement, desperate to learn whether telepathy was raw magic or a crest's power. Roydan barked that he knew nothing about magic or crests, but as the earth dragon he used to blast his thoughts through his horn. Hiel and Varys locked onto the horn, a shock of clarity hitting them. This was where all of Roydan's magic converged. He was an ancient dragon. It was a given he seethed with strange powers he didn't even know he had. Roydan leaned in, curiosity blazing, and asked about the... A towering, ancient tree rose behind them and a voice burst out. Is that Yggdrasil? Roydan boasted he'd known of the tree for ages, and up close it dwarfed the stories, far more majestic than any rumor. Seeing this tree, doubt crumbled in him. If something like this could exist, then those whispered rumors might be real, not just fairy tales. He hurled the question at them. Is there a continent around here called Paradise? Doubt flickered in Hiel, and Roydan leaned in, saying he'd heard it was a continent far to the east where humans and monsters lived side by side with countless races steeped in rich culture and wild, overflowing nature. Roydan's eyes locked on a tiny island that roughly matched the rumors he'd heard. He hesitated, unsure if he'd meant the burly on the continent. Rihanna blinked and admitted she wasn't sure either. Doubt flared in Roydan. He thought it might not be true, then Varys leaned in and asked if he was hunting for a new home. Roydan refused, snapping that his goal lay elsewhere. Everything screamed one electrifying truth. Meeting Hiel and the others might be their lucky break. He hollered for everyone to gather round and see, as he set his basket down with a thud. They barreled in to find out what he'd been talking about. Roydan snapped the basket's lock open, claiming he'd unveil a rare cache of items from distant Elto. He reintroduced himself as Roydan, the traveling merchant, and urged them to feast their eyes on his incredible wares. Hiel's jaw dropped when he saw Roydan behind a merchant's stall, hawking wares. Roydan confessed his trade had been gutted by constant fighting in Elto, so he ripped up his roots and expanded his operations into Sheol. He unleashed dozens of never-before-seen treasures, and Hiel gaped. Even more shocking was how Roydan's basket swallowed them all. Roydan grinned and said it was a compression basket made from a Yajigan lizard's stomach that compressed anything placed inside so it could hold anything, and many of the items gleamed, forged from dragon materials. He revealed the vase was sculpted from process scales, the knife carved from hardened nails, and every other piece forged from top-quality dragon materials. Hiel finally understood why he'd never seen them before. Dragons were painfully rare. Roydan leapt forward and showed how to heal the fire dragons and the wyvern's eggs. Both dragons tore across the sky, ice crusting their hides, and Varys demanded to know why the frost clung to them. Roydon shrugged and said he was stashing the eggs to boil and eat later, and Hiel's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe Roydon genuinely saw them as nothing more than food. He declared with a cold smile that dragons regarded other dragons' bodies as nothing more than resources. They could warm the eggs and coax life from inside, and he'll ask Roydon if the newborn dragons will bond to them. Roydon agreed, insisting dragons imprint on the first face they see as a parent. Fiola snapped at Hiel to raise one that alone would let them fly. Hiel leaned in, declared he'd take one of Roydon's eggs, and asked bluntly, "How much do you want for it?" Roydon jabbed a finger at Yggdrasil and asked if he could take some saplings. Elto had become a barren wasteland, but he believed Yggdrasil could paint it green again, the ancient trees that once blanketed the land before so many died, and he planned to replant them there, one by one. When the volcano finally fell silent, Rihanna whooped. Roydon vowed to breathe life back into his home. Twist, his reason was shockingly simple. He planned to tend the saplings, wait for the perfect moment, then sell them for a tidy profit like any savvy merchant. He snatched the saplings and walked off with a dragon egg and a mountain of Mappa 2 items, study. Roydon slid in one last thing, a quiet token to say thanks for the food from earlier. He shoved a package into his hands, woven from the same material as the compression basket, and stuffed with rocks and gritty soil he'd scavenged along the road, and Hiel's grin flared. This dirt would let them push their fields outward. Roydon grinned, already picturing Hiel walking back through his door as a regular at his counter. Roydon hit the sack for a night, came back promising he'd return, and nobody saw the twist. Someone else, not Camus, became the Shield's first business partner. He realized an entire world lay beyond his maps, whole continents like Elto where dragons shredded the skies, and his heart raced picturing countless civilizations out there, even the one he. Driven to uncover what lay beneath the shield, he raced back to the spot where they'd met Roydon and plunged into the ruins to continue their exploration. Water burst from the spring-studded pillar. He pointed and urged them to trail the rushing stream, hunting whatever secrets the ruins hid. He realized he'd have to trust Terran to get down the cliff. Ashton scoffed and insisted he'd have no problem going down by himself. Moments later, Rihanna burst into their ranks, eyes alight and thrilled, and dove headfirst into the investigation. She flashed Hiel a grateful grin and thanked him for letting her join his plunge into Sheol's underground mystery. Ashton surged ahead, declaring he'd go first and urging him to follow right behind. And they bolted in an instant. Hiel watched, clearly impressed, and next the Highness strode forward. Now it was their turn. He swept Fula and Riel along with him. Hiel and Rihanna plunged down, Tehran anchoring their fall. Rihanna stood inches from him, and his pulse thundered. Words died in his throat. Not now. He couldn't let a single distraction steal his focus. Before they barged in to kick off the investigation earlier. He'll be ready, he sharpens, polishes, and tends every tool until it gleams. Rihanna locked eyes with him. He told her he'd learned to tend his tools from Mappa, and his ice axe now gleamed and sparkled. She leaned in, eyes blazing, and demanded to know whether the investigation into the new ruins had him on edge. A raw storm of curiosity and dread burst out of him as he demanded to know what his father was after. He couldn't honestly imagine his father's thoughts. He'd never even tried. His mind went blank. He couldn't remember ever talking to him. Only stiff formalities, and his father's barking orders ever passed between them. Other than that, no word ever came from him. Silence swallowed every reply. In the royal court, his father's words ruled like iron, final and unquestioned. He braced for the sting of realizing he'd actually been into everything his father had wanted him to all along. Rihanna wrapped him in a fierce calm and, eyes blazing, urged him to go unearth Sheol's secrets and find what his father wanted. He snapped back into his own fierce determination. He wanted to dig, and he felt it deep down, even after he'd turned his back on his father and the kingdom. Careening down Tehran's cliff, he finally spun and met them head-on. He slashed a bold mark across the shield, a clear sign he stepped into the next stage of his exploration. As they plunged down, Tarin anchored her spiderweb lifeline tight for safety, and just a few meters down, he caught sight of a faint, wavering light. They plunged to the bottom, swallowed by a colossal semidome that wrapped around them. The canals roared, swollen with water pouring down from above. Rihanna stared as time had devoured the place. Hiel had hoped the path ahead would still be intact, but it lay shattered now. Unease knotted his gut as he scanned for the others. Fuller's voice suddenly barked, "Hiel," from the far side of the pillar. They burst in, breathless, and told him they'd found a canal plunging even deeper. She beckoned him onward, and he turned to find Ashton standing there, too. Highness pressed into the canal's darkness, leaning in and straining to snatch even the faintest whisper from ahead. He rapped the wall with his sword's spine, then leaned in, ears hunting for every faint echo. Doubt roared through him. He questioned what he was doing. Then, once he was done, Hines burst back in and declared the canal was rock solid. Nobody needed to fear it collapsing. The deeper they plunged, the place snarled into ever-tightening twists that could swallow them whole. Hiel gaped. Hyenas had parsed every danger from a single sound. Rihanna grinned and insisted they'd mark the trail as they went so no one would get lost, and Fula practically fizzed with excitement for the adventure ahead. They plunged deeper into the canal, and Hiel gaped in shock. There was. His heart hammered. Something like this had been lurking down here the whole time, and he burned to know who made it and why. Rihanna shot back that it had to be the humans. They'd already spotted signs of a being by the statue of a woman in the library. Ashton snapped that Burleighan might never have heard of them, yet their descendants could be living in some distant land. Fula snapped that they could be burrowing out homes right under us, the very underground people Roydon warned about. Full of something, they suddenly spotted something on their way. They sprinted to check it out, and it was just a wobbling heap of slimes. Hiel insisted they leave the slimes alone, declaring the creatures harmless. They discovered slimes lurking beneath their feet, oozing and writhing in the dark underground. And he'll never forget stumbling upon shells and shadowed caves too. Another figure slammed into his mind, and Mappa and he scrambled to pin down which era Mappa had sprung from, or whether he holds any answers about these ruins. The canal ahead funneled straight into another canal. They hunted the water's call, racing toward every distant splash. Then, they stepped into a cavernous hallway that gaped ahead, a gateway to a vast, open chamber. Hina strained to track the water's whisper beneath him. Its pull guided him straight to the gate, so he surged forward. She'll spot something and burst into frantic jumps around the heel. A split second later, the door slammed shut along with the very entrance they'd come through slammed shut, sealing them inside. Rihanna's senses flared as raw magic surged from the walls. Mysterious blocks erupted from the wall. The walls convulsed and reformed into a sleek security drone. It flared into a sickly glow, and they knew in an instant it spelled nothing but trouble. The drones unleashed searing beams. He slammed a shimmering shield into place at the last heartbeat, saving everyone just in time, then barked, "Watch out." It hit him. Those drones were security guards. He unleashed thunder magic and obliterated them, but two. His jaw dropped as the drone devoured his magic and blasted it right back at them. The blast hurled him backward, and in the choking dust he finally learned just how lethal those drones could be. Fula snapped, "We can't attack them like this." Suddenly one of the drones lunged at her and siphoned the shield she was using straight into itself. Their hopes crumbled as disaster closed in. Ashton lunged into the open, daring the drone to lock onto him. Ashton snapped, "If magic can't touch these drones, we cut them down," and he immediately slashed into the closest machines. Gale Ashton, captain of the Imperial Guard of the Tyrus tribe, coiled and blasted into his next attack, a thunderous display that proved his raw, terrifying power. He blasted forward, picking off the distant drones. Drones zeroed in, but he vanished into a streak of motion, too fast for their targeting to touch him. Speed, Ashton sliced through them in an instant. And Rihanna, he was stunned by that lightning speed as she cheered him on with wild, breathless shouts. Ashton blasted a handful of drones into scrap, and the rest hovering nearby froze. He spun on his heel and barreled straight toward Ashton. He pleaded with Highness to let him rush to Ashton's aid, but Highness brushed him off and told him to rest easy, since his brother Ashton alone proved more than enough for them. Ashton blew everyone away, dominating every battle with jaw-dropping skill. The drones snapped into a precise pattern, ricocheting heat rays off each other in perfect sync to zero in on him. They scored a hit on Ashton, but it ricocheted off him. He didn't even flinch. Still, dozens more drones swooped in, boxing him in at once. Hines slammed down cover for Ashton, their lightning-quick coordination outclassing the drones. They unleashed their own perfectly coordinated attacks, their specialty. Ashton and Hine hurled themselves into a brutal showdown with the entire folk of the drones. Ashton obliterated them with a shadow slash, so lightning-fast it convinced anyone he was everywhere at once. Every drone lay finished before Hiel, and others even caught on. He ripped the truth into the open, a medicine that let them heal and finally move forward. Ashton and Hines ripped through the chaos and hauled everyone to safety. Hiel barreled over to inspect what the golems were made of, ripped open the drone's wreckage, and found heart stones inside. He grinned he'd suck them dry and melt the scraps into something brand new. He ripped through the cache of parts used to make them, and uncovered the magic-absorbing crystal. A levitating stone catapults them into the sky, and black iron makes them shrug off searing heat. Falas slammed the floating stone into action, and it held steady in the air. Hiel cracked how the drones pulled it off and walked away having learned something new. Ashton warned the drones looked like they were guarding something and insisted they check it out. Hyla nodded and agreed. Then the door ahead of them groaned and swung open on its own. They didn't have to break it. Ashton's instinct screamed. This time, something was inside the door. They watched every second, and a golem stomped out of the doorway, instantly making their situation far worse. A new opponent burst onto the scene, and nobody blinked. Everyone had seen it coming. Hiel locked onto the heartstone hidden inside, and dismissed it as just another doll. This time the golem loomed brutally powerful, an armored fusion of knight and warhorse, and Ashton barked, "Don't take your eyes off it." Without warning, the golem bellowed in a language no one could recognize. Hiel froze when it suddenly spoke, but its voice tangled into sounds he couldn't make out. The idea of a talking golem gnawed at him again, but Fula scoffed and shrugged it off as pure gibberish. Rihanna snapped. The golem's language might be the same tongue from those books we dug up in the library earlier. He charges forward to test if the golem understands, shouting that he's from the surface above this land. The golem blinked like granite as every word he hurled at it fell flat. None of them sank in. It yanked its sword free and fired a searing bolt of magic from its arm. Rihanna and Fula reeled, stunned by it, and Highness barked, "Stay back." Highness slammed his shield into the golem's strike and held fast, while Hiel. They still pleaded with the thing, shouting, "We are not your enemies." The golem ratcheted its assault into an even more devastating blow, and Hines braced himself. A battle with it was now unavoidable. Ashton tore into the fray, shouting at Hines to capture the golem alive if possible, and the two of them hammered at the stone colossus. The golem proved terrifyingly skilled, matching both of them stride for stride. They slammed together as steel screamed from every direction, and it stubbornly held its ground against them. Ashton and Highness were slammed backward by its relentless attacks, and with every hit they realized they were facing a ruthless, deadly master. Fuller pictured himself charging in to help them. She lashed out at it with crackling magic. Ashton lunged to stop her, but she attacked anyway. And the golem heaved its left arm, the limb bearing the absorbing crystal. It swallowed her strike, and she said, "Sorry, I made it tougher," and Ashton guessed as much. Then the golem morphed its arm into a crossbow and loosed an arrow wreathed in roaring fire magic. The bow's twang ripped through the air, snapping everyone's attention, and he'll surge into action at once. They instantly summoned a colossal boulder that slammed down between them and the volley of arrows, shielding them. He barked for everyone to dive behind it as the golem kept battering them. Then the golem barreled at them, a jagged spear jutting from its arm. It struck with brutal force, pulverizing the boulder they were hiding behind. In a heartbeat, they all threw themselves aside, the impact smashing into empty air. He'd soon learn this wasn't just another golem or doll. It was leagues above anything they'd ever faced. Ashton scoffed, sure they were far too naive to actually catch it. We unleashed its phantom dash and tore forward like the wind. To everyone's shock, Gola's gaze pierced Ashton's attack too. The blow ripped in like lightning and struck Ashton. He slammed his sword up and parried it. Shock slammed into him as the golem kept pace with the gale he'd unleashed. He barreled back just as the golem lunged, smashing straight toward them both. It braided dread into their veins, forcing them to feel the tension of its next strike before it even lunged. It lunged at both of them with blinding speed, then tore into Hiel, Rihanna, and Fuller. I watched Ashton and Hines get slammed backward, and we were powerless to help them. A bolt of inspiration struck him, and with Highness and Ashton keeping things buzzing, he hatched a plan with Rihanna, heart racing with the wild belief it would work. The moment the situation surfaced, they sprang into action and launched their plan. He flipped open Riel's bag and called to Riel, who'd been asleep inside until that moment. It channeled its clairvoyance and locked onto the water line. The moment he laid eyes on it, he smashed it to pieces with his ice axe. The moment the water line blew apart, Ashton and Heinous whipped their heads around as a thunderous impact erupts behind them. Water slammed in, filling the whole area and climbing until it licked just above their feet. Next, he shouted for Hines and Ashton to fall back to the walls. Hovering above the grove, he, Rihanna, and Fully channeled Terran's spider webs and unleashed a freezing spell that locked the entire water-covered surface solid. The golem erupted from the water, vaulting into the air to dodge the freeze attack. Within moments, ice surged outward and swallowed the entire area. Turns out the heel aimed straight for the hooves and the legs. It looked hopeless, completely unsuited for any movement on the ice. Tarin lashed a strand of web onto its leg and yanked it crashing to the ground. Ashton and Highness spotted the opening and pounced. They pounced on the golem from its flanks, vaulting from wall to wall. They swore they'd finally caught the golem, but its next move stunned them as it slammed into the earth. It rocketed skyward, flaunting the same lightning speed Ashton and Highness showed. A collective gasp split the air. Nobody expected the golem to move like that. Ashton and Hines froze at the center, the world knocking the words clean from their mouths. Then, before they could even blink, it was already happening. The golem lunged between them, spinning its massive arms into a crushing whirlwind of blows. He spun and launched them, slamming their bodies into the walls on either side. Shock slammed into Hiel. Highness froze beside him. They scrambled to uncover how the gola had suddenly exploded into motion. They stared as its legs twisted and sharpened into spear-like points. Then it zeroed in on Hiel and unleashed its next devastating strike. Highness and Rihanna sprinted toward him, but time betrayed them. They arrived too late to save him. Hiel knew there was nowhere left to run. He planted his feet, squared his shoulders, and charged straight at it. Shell shot forward and planted himself in front of him. Someone yelled, "Watch out, Shell!" But Shell held his ground, shielding Hiel. The golem stopped cold mid-attack the instant it spotted the shell. They never saw it coming. Golem snapped back to Hiel before they could react. Others rushed in to heal him and shouted, "Are you all right?" But Ashton froze, adrenaline spiking. Why had the golem suddenly broken off its assault on them? The golem loomed, riveted, watching Shell and Hiel share a warm, unmistakably friendly moment. The golem spoke. The voice that spilled out was shockingly different from before. He whipped his head around, eyes scouring for where it was coming from then. Highness snapped, "It's coming from inside the golem." Its belly mechanism began to unlatch, metal plates snapping apart as the hatch yawned open. To everyone's shock, a tiny girl tumbled out from within the golem, rubbing sleep from her eyes. They'd spent the whole fight pounding at what they assumed was just a kid pulling the golem's strings. All certainty shattered when they watched the golem speak to her, and she fired back in their tongue, a language Hiel had never heard. She locked eyes with Hiel, and voice jagged and stumbling, ripped words out in his language. Filled snapped, could she understand them? The little girl snapped. She'd learned their language by listening to them talk. Their jaws dropped. This kid's intelligence hit them like a lightning strike. Their jaws dropped as a kid burst out of a golem in the underground ruins. And impossibly, the kid was already speaking to them. She lunged toward Hiel. The ice betrayed her, and she went down hard. He asked if she was all right. She turned to the golem and whispered a single, cryptic command. It lunged in and scooped her up. She spotted the yawning hole in the canal and barked urgent orders. The water slammed to a halt, the flow cut dead for a breathless stretch. She barked her next command, and more winged. Drones burst from the door ahead of them. Hope surged through them, convinced these were reinforcements, and the tiny kid christened the drones Argo and snapped, "Don't attack anyone. He'll be slammed by recognition. It's their name," and then the drones ignited the magic in their cores and surged into the broken canal, stitching the damage back together. Realization slammed into them. She was commanding the dolls. The kid demanded to know what happened to the Argo in this passage, and she watched in horror as they were obliterated by them. He'll lunge into an explanation, pleading that he had no other choice, and choking out an apology. After that, the kid leaned in, heart pounding, and realized they'd come from the surface. He lunges at her, voice raw, and pours out a fierce apology for wrecking the ruins. He was desperate to uncover why his father had sent him to this place, maybe buried down here, and he grilled the kid until he spilled every secret about the ruins. A blast of light hit her, like surfacing from the deep. She suddenly realized for the first time that she'd been underground until now. It briefly blindsided Hiel. Only now did the truth slam into her. She was in ruins. She'd been swallowed by sleep for ages, and when she finally woke, her mind was empty. No information about this place, nothing at all. Hiel, suspecting her memory had been muddled, leaned in and demanded to know why she was guarding the ruins and who she was. She snapped, "Protecting this land is my duty." Her mind erased every trace but that single memory. Meanwhile, Cold rattled Fuller to the bone. He exploded into a sneeze, then forced out, "Sorry, but..." The cold clawed at her bones. She couldn't help herself. He snapped at the kid to go somewhere else. The kid relented, and now they had only themselves to blame. The kid demanded, "Why did the Kavo, the slime shell, protect you from the Balshan's attack?" Bulshan, the hulking golem that slammed Ashton and Hines into a corner earlier. He declared to her that its name was Shell, his friend, and swore Shell had rescued him time and again. The kid obeyed him and ordered them to hunt her down. He'll spin toward her and ask, "What should we call you?" She still hadn't caught on, so he'll slam the question at her. "What do the Balshan call you when they talk?" He barked his name, Hiel, then paraded the others into the spotlight. It hit her to them, a name marked you as other. She flashed a grin and declared they could call her Nane. Rihanna and Hiel beamed and chimed. It was nice to meet her. Nano grinned and warned he'd suddenly look marked by a strange trait. She meant the cave king crest blooming on him. They sprinted to the door ahead, flung it open, and barreled inside. More Argo roared to life, and Nane's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down. Do not attack them." She swore Argo wouldn't dare strike while they stood at her side. Fuller leaned in and fired the question at Nane. "What language do you speak?" She shook her head. It didn't even have a name. She hadn't spoken to a soul, only Balshian. Fula leaned in and asked if loneliness was gnawing at her. She snapped back. "No shortage of manpower," her tone cold and clinical, all about the system. Rihanna and Hiel gaped as Nane seized the Balian tongue, her sentences tumbling out with impossible speed and flawless confidence. Fuller then urged they take Nane to the library. She could read them. Nane met their eyes, voice breaking as she told them she couldn't leave this place. Fuller promised she'd be welcomed, and said that if they unveiled Sheol's secrets, her memories could come crashing back. Nane, her memory wiped clean, swore to guard this place. If she vanished, the defending golems would snap out of control and unleash chaos. Rihanna smirked and hinted she'd show up next time loaded with books. They skidded to a stop before a towering, mysterious door, and Nane declared the main area waited on the other side. Heine sniffed sharply as a strange scent sliced through the air from up ahead. He couldn't believe it was underground. Confusion boiled over in Hiel. Nane barked a thunderous command, "Open the gate." The gate swung open, and a blinding light poured out. Everyone froze, eyes wide and unblinking, disbelief roaring as the sight before them looked ripped straight from another world. They gaped as greenery exploded around them, and for a stunned second they couldn't tell if they were outside. A river sliced right through the place, alive with fish darting through its current. Hiel craned his neck and peered at the ceiling to confirm they were really inside the ruins. And they realized a massive sunstone loomed before them. He heard Riel's delighted barks. She just spotted even more slime swarming the place. To my shock, colossal golems materialized too, but looks like they're here to tend the grounds, snipping each leaf with surgical precision and sculpting the foliage into stunning, flawless shapes. Nane snapped, "Don't you dare startle the Kavo." Hiel barked, "You look after the slimes too." She snapped that protecting the Kavo was part of her duties. A memory exploded in Hiel, and he snapped at Nane. "Who assigned you to this duty?" She admitted she didn't even understand it herself. Trying to explain was a struggle, so she paused and thought it over. She snapped, "It's easier if I just show you." She led them onward as they drank in the tunnel of trees, every step a gasp at its beauty. She marched them back to the exact spot where she'd jolted awake and been handed her duty. She launched into her past, pouring out her story from the very first moment. She jolted awake into pitch black, blind to everything as the cramped space closed in around her. After that, she burst into a world ablaze with light. Her eyes snapped open to Balshan kneeling right beside her. The second thing to slam into her view was a statue of a woman. She led them to the statue, and their jaws dropped, surprised too. His heart lurched. It was the same woman from the library. He hurled the question at Nane, "Who are you?" And she froze, eyes hollow, not a single memory of herself returned. The moment she saw her, a voice thundered that protecting her was her duty. One single word slammed into her, a gut instinct telling her what she had to protect. She knew the stone statue never spoke, yet its silent stare had carved a jagged shard into her memory. For a fleeting moment, she basked in importance while pity simmered in him. He told her fiercely she might still be able to fulfill her duty to protect even without her memories. He demanded she, at the very least, claw back the memories about. Curiosity clawed at me. Who did that statue really portray? She was clearly someone important to Nane. The others erupted in relieved cheers when Hiel spoke up for Nane. She declined, not knowing what he wanted her to do. Her systematic mind found his argument utterly without foundation, and he flinched at that, scrambling to explain why feelings mattered. He froze, clueless about the right way to handle it. Nane noticed in an instant. She whipped back to the statue, leaned in close, and he darted after her, shouting, "What happened?" Nane admitted she'd barely glanced at the statue's inscription. She had no clue what it meant. When Hiel saw what she was talking about, shock slammed into him, leaving him staggered. Nane fired a question at him, grilling him about that jaw-dropping coincidence. How did the Cave King's crest end up emblazoned across that statue? And what he really turned out to be?